Hey everyone, tonight we're going back. We've got a Monday morning in a post-war kitchen that smells of vinegar, and something warm and slightly astringent that your grandmother would recognise before you could even name it. A housewife already on her feet before the coffee has finished percolating, and the cleaning has not yet started, but the day certainly has. We have got the story of Tide, the orange box that rewrote the American laundry room and made Procter & Gamble into something close to a domestic empire, and the women who were promised that a powder in a box could give them back their afternoons. We have got an afternoon on the doorstep, where a woman with a sample case full of brushes, mops and polishing cloths learned to read a stranger's threshold in under 30 seconds, because her commission depended on getting through that screen door before the conversation ended. And we have got the hidden reality behind the gleaming, sparkling, magazine-perfect clean American home of the post-war years, what the advertisements photographed, and what they quietly cropped out of frame. So before you get settled, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy spending time here. And leave me a comment letting me know where you are watching from and what time it is wherever you are. I love seeing that. Now get comfortable, maybe pull a blanket up, and let us go back together. The alarm does not wake you so much as confirm what your body already suspected. It is Monday. The light coming through the curtains is the particular grey-white of early morning, in a town that is still deciding whether it wants to be fully awake, and you are already lying there with the quiet understanding that the day has an agenda, and you are not in charge of revising it. You lie still for one more moment, your feet finding the specific warm pocket at the bottom of the sheets that took most of the night to cultivate, your eyes tracing the familiar water stain on the ceiling above the bed that has been there since the winter of the year before last and will be there, you suspect, for some time yet. Then your husband rolls over, and the mattress shifts, and the moment is over. You put your feet on the floor. The linoleum is cold in the way that linoleum in October is cold, which is to say that it communicates its temperature immediately and without sympathy, travelling up through the soles of your feet and into your ankles before you have taken 3 steps toward the bathroom. Your housecoat is on the hook behind the door, cotton chenille in a faded rose colour, soft enough from years of washing to feel almost liquid against your arms when you pull it on. Your slippers are where you left them, which is fortunate because this morning is not one for hunting. You move through the hallway without turning on the lights, knowing the distance by the particular creak of the third board from the bathroom door, by the slightly colder air near the window at the end of the corridor, by the faint smell of last night's supper still drifting up from the kitchen below. The kitchen is the first room that requires your full attention every morning, and you give it to the kitchen first because the kitchen has the most to say about the day ahead. You fill the percolator and set it on the burner, and while it heats you stand at the window and look out at the backyard in the early light, at the clothesline still strung between the 2 posts your husband set in concrete the summer after you moved in, at the garden bed along the back fence where the last of the marigolds are still trying. The gas flame makes its small sound beneath the coffee pot. The house is quiet in a way it will not be again until tonight, and you're aware of that quiet the way you are aware of anything temporary, with a sort of attentive appreciation that does not have time to turn into sentiment before it is already over. Today is Monday, which means cleaning day. Not ordinary cleaning, the quick wipe of a counter, the gathering of newspapers and cups from the parlour, the straightening that happens almost unconsciously in the course of any ordinary afternoon. Monday cleaning is the real work, the kind that has a sequence, a logic, a beginning and a middle and an end that arrives sometime around 4 o'clock in the afternoon if everything goes as planned, and closer to 5:30 if it does not. You have been doing Monday cleaning since the week you and your husband moved into this house, and before that you did it in your mother's house, and before that you watched your mother do it in her mother's house, and the sequence has not changed very much across all those years and all those women, which is either comforting or slightly startling depending on what kind of morning you're having. You pour your first cup of coffee and carry it to the kitchen table, and sit down with it for exactly as long as it takes to drink half of it, which is the allowance you have made for yourself, half a cup sitting down, and then the rest standing up while you get the children moving and the breakfast started. The children will need to be fed and sent to school before any real cleaning can begin, because cleaning with children underfoot is not cleaning so much as a particularly frustrating form of exercise. Your son is 9 and your daughter is 6, and they are, taken individually, manageable people, but together and in motion they have an uncanny ability to resoil any surface that has just been cleaned, to introduce crumbs into rooms that have not yet been touched, to track something unnameable across a floor that was spotless 3 minutes ago. You love them. You also understand that they need to be at school for the Monday cleaning to happen in any meaningful way. Breakfast is eggs this morning, scrambled with a little butter in the iron skillet, and toast from the Sunbeam toaster that sits on the counter near the window, the one you have had since your wedding, and that has developed over the years a slight tendency to toast one side more thoroughly than the other, which your son has declared a feature rather than a defect because he prefers his toast unevenly browned. You make the lunches while the eggs cook. 2 wax paper packets of bologna sandwiches with a scraping of mustard, 2 small bags of potato chips, 2 apples from the bowl on the counter. The lunch boxes are already out, the plaid one and the red one with the thermos that always smells faintly of milk no matter how many times you wash it. You have washed that thermos more times than you can count. It still smells of milk. Some things simply absorb their history and hold on to it. The children come downstairs in the particular thunderous way that children descend stairs, and breakfast is eaten with the specific combination of urgency and inattention that characterises every weekday morning in this kitchen. Your daughter spilling a small amount of orange juice that you wipe up before it reaches the edge of the table. Your son forgetting his library book until the last possible moment and running back upstairs for it, with a noise that shakes the ceiling light fixture. Then they're gone, backpacks and lunch boxes and the cold air that rushes in through the open front door and hangs in the hallway for a moment, before the house adjusts and you are alone in the kitchen with the dirty breakfast dishes and the linoleum already needing to be swept and the whole day arranged before you like a list that has been memorised so completely it no longer needs to be written down. You stand at the sink and look at the kitchen the way you look at it every Monday morning, which is not the way you look at it the rest of the week. You look at it as a project, as a space that has a condition and a potential condition, and your job today is to close the distance between those two things in every room of the house. You have a system, and the system starts with the kitchen because the kitchen is where grease lives, where it settles overnight onto surfaces you thought were clean, where it gathers in the corners of the range and along the edge of the backsplash and in the channel around the burner, grates in a thin, invisible film that only reveals itself when the light catches it at the right angle, or when you run your finger along a surface and your finger comes back with something on it that is not dust but is denser than dust, slightly tacky to the touch, the accumulated evidence of all those meals. The first thing you reach for is not under the sink but in the cabinet above the stove, where you keep the baking soda in a large cardboard box that has been refilled so many times its corners have gone soft. Baking soda is not glamorous. It does not come in a bottle with a modern design and a promise printed on the label. It is simply what it is, a white powder in a box, and it has been cleaning American kitchens for longer than most people in those kitchens have been alive. You shake some onto a damp cloth, and the smell that rises is faint and clean, slightly mineral. The smell of something that is not trying to pretend to be a flower or a forest or a new car, but simply smells like clean itself, which is a smell that has no pretension because it has no need of any. You start with the range. The burner grates come off and go into the sink with hot water and a little dish soap to soak while you work on the surface. Baking soda on the cloth moving in small circles over the enamelled top of the stove, working against the grease with the particular patience that grease requires, which is to say that you do not rush it, because rushing grease produces frustration rather than results. The burner ring has a dark spot where something boiled over during the week, something tomato-based that baked onto the enamel and dried and became part of the stove's personal history, in the way that these things always do. You work at it with the baking soda and a slightly firmer pressure, and it lifts eventually, not all at once, but in stages, the way most things worth cleaning lift, gradually and with persuasion. The smell in the kitchen changes as you work, the faint sulphur of the gas burners when they first catch, the ghost of last night's supper still in the air, and now layering over it the clean baking soda smell and the sharper smell of the vinegar that comes next, because after the baking soda comes the vinegar, a splash of white vinegar in warm water in a bowl, applied with a cloth to the stovetop, after the baking soda has done its work, cutting through the last traces of residue and leaving the enamel with a slight shine. The vinegar smell is sharp and brief, present strongly for a minute and then fading almost entirely as it dries, and what it leaves behind is not a smell at all but the absence of smell, a clean blankness that means the job has been done correctly. You move to the refrigerator next, which requires its own ritual. You pull everything out of the vegetable drawer, which contains 3 carrots, half a head of celery, and something wrapped in wax paper that you unwrap cautiously and determine is leftover pot roast from Thursday. You set the pot roast on the counter for consideration and wash the drawer in the sink with warm soapy water, then dry it completely before putting it back, because a damp vegetable drawer is an invitation to something you do not want to think about on a Monday morning. The shelves inside the refrigerator get wiped down with a cloth dampened with water and a small amount of baking soda, because the refrigerator smell, that faintly metallic, slightly food-adjacent coolness that accumulates when a refrigerator has been closed for a week, responds to baking soda the way most odours respond to baking soda, which is to say that it does not so much disappear as recede to a comfortable distance. There is an open box of baking soda on the middle shelf of the refrigerator, which has been there for so long its corners have rounded, and the box has absorbed a faint yellowish cast from the cold. You replace it with the fresh box from under the counter, the one you bought specifically for this purpose, and this feels like a small, satisfying completion in a morning that is still mostly in completion. You set the old box on the counter next to the sink. Because the old baking soda still has uses, it will go down the drain with some hot water to help with any nascent drain smell, and then what remains will be scattered in the bottom of the kitchen trash can before you put in a new liner. Because the bottom of the kitchen trash can is where smells are born, and baking soda understands this. By the time you have finished the kitchen, your husband's coffee cup is washed and drying in the rack, and the stovetop is clean enough to reflect a vague and slightly warped version of the ceiling light, and you're on your second cup of coffee, standing up as planned, because sitting down now would be a concession the day would not forgive you. The kitchen clock says 8:52. You have approximately 7 hours before the children come home, and in those 7 hours there is a bathroom to clean, a parlour to dust and vacuum, a bedroom to change and tidy, a hallway that needs sweeping, and the floors, all the floors, the linoleum in the kitchen and bathroom and hallway, and the hardwood in the parlour and bedrooms that need a dust mopping. And then, if this is the week you have decided it is the week, which it might be, an actual waxing. You carry your coffee to the bathroom, which is the second room in your cleaning sequence, because the bathroom is the room that has the most direct relationship with human bodies, and therefore with the particular category of mess that requires the most attention and the most specific tools. The bathroom medicine cabinet is closed, but you know its contents the way you know the contents of your own purse, which is to say completely and by feel. Behind that mirrored door are the things you have been reaching for your entire adult life, and some of them have been in your family in one form or another since before you were born. There is the hydrogen peroxide in its brown bottle, which is what you use to clean the grout around the tub, because hydrogen peroxide and grout have a relationship that goes back further than most cleaning products, and that does not require a modern label to validate it. You pour a small amount of hydrogen peroxide onto an old toothbrush, the one you retired from its primary duties specifically for this purpose, and you work it into the grout lines with the particular satisfaction that comes from doing a thing that requires a specific tool and having the specific tool. The grout between the white tiles around the bathtub is one of the quiet battlegrounds of domestic life in the 1950s. It shows everything. It absorbs soap residue and hard water minerals and the faint pinkish film that develops in warm, damp spaces and that cannot be wished away or politely ignored, only addressed directly. The hydrogen peroxide foams slightly when it contacts the grout, a faint white fizzing that indicates the product is doing something, which is reassuring in the way that visible action is always more reassuring than invisible action, even when both accomplish the same thing. You work the grout methodically, section by section, rinsing with the hand shower attachment and moving to the next section, before the first has had a chance to dry, and when you have finished the entire surround, the grout is not white, because grout in a house that has been lived in for 6 years is never entirely white, but it is clean, which is a different quality and a more honest one. The toilet comes next, and you address it without ceremony, because ceremony is not what the toilet requires. What it requires is borax. You have kept borax in this bathroom since the week you moved in an old coffee can with a plastic lid that sits in the cabinet under the sink next to the extra rolls of toilet paper and the box of Kotex and the bottle of witch hazel that your mother gave you, and that you use for everything from a cotton ball toner to a compress for your son's scraped knees. Borax is one of those things that should probably be more celebrated than it is, a mineral salt with a quiet confidence, effective against mildew and mineral deposits, and the particular ring that forms inside a toilet bowl when the water in your town runs on the harder side of the hardness scale, which it does. You shake borax from the can around the inside of the bowl, let it sit for a few minutes while you wipe down the tank and the seat and the base with a clean cloth, and a little of the vinegar and water solution you have brought with you from the kitchen, and then you scrub the bowl with the long-handled brush that lives behind the toilet in its holder and flush. And the porcelain is clean in the particular thorough way that borax produces, a clean that does not have a strong smell and does not announce itself but is simply present. The bathroom mirror gets vinegar. Everything that is glass in this house gets vinegar, which is a decision you made when you realised that the glass cleaner you had been buying was expensive and that vinegar, diluted with water in a spray bottle that used to hold something else, did the same job for approximately 1/10 the cost. The mirror in this bathroom is small, set into the cabinet above the sink, and it tends to collect water spots near the bottom from the faucet splash, and a faint smear at face height from the steam on winter mornings when the window is closed. The vinegar-soaked cloth removes both with one pass, and the mirror comes back clear in the way that mirrors are supposed to be clear, which is to say that you can see yourself in it plainly, which on a Monday morning when you have been cleaning for an hour and a half is not entirely a comfort, but is at least accurate. You are sweating slightly by the time you finish the bathroom. Not dramatically, not in a way that requires acknowledgement, but in the particular way that physical work in a small, warm room produces, a dampness along the back of your neck and at your temples that will dry in the cooler air of the hallway. You carry your cleaning things into that cooler air and stand for a moment in the hall, looking at the rest of the house, assessing what remains. The parlour door is open, and you can see the dust motes moving in the light that comes through the front window, tiny and slow, and that movement tells you something about the quality of the air and the quantity of the dust, and the amount of work ahead of you. The parlour is a room that presents itself well. This is the room that company sees, the room where your husband's mother sits when she visits, and where the children do their homework on school nights, and where the Christmas tree goes in December, and it has been furnished and arranged with the understanding that it will be looked at, which means it has to be kept in a condition that can withstand looking at. The sofa is olive green with a low back, and 2 armrests that have never fully recovered from your son's habit, at age 4 and 5, of using them as launching pads. The armchair by the window is your husband's in the way that certain pieces of furniture become associated with certain people, not by any formal declaration but simply by repeated occupation, and it holds a kind of invisible impression of him that you notice most on the evenings when he is away on business and the chair is empty. The television set sits in the corner, a Zenith in a walnut veneer cabinet which your husband bought 2 years ago and which remains one of the more impressive possessions in the house, a fact that is not lost on your son, who treats its proximity with a reverence that he does not extend to most other things. Dusting in the parlour is a choreography that you have performed so many times it has become almost unconscious. You start at the top because dust moves downward, and working upward would mean redusting everything below, which is a mistake you made once, years ago, and did not make again. The highest points in the parlour are the tops of the bookshelves and the top of the Zenith cabinet, which collect a surprising amount of dust for surfaces that are never touched. You use a cotton cloth for this, slightly dampened, because a dry cloth moves dust around and a damp cloth captures it, which is a distinction your mother taught you and her mother taught her, and that every woman who has cleaned a house for any length of time eventually arrives at on her own. But it is faster to be told. The cloth comes away grey after the first pass across the top of the bookshelf, grey with the fine, settled particulate of a week of ordinary domestic life. The shed skin and fabric fibres and pollen and road dust that finds its way through windows and under doors and that accumulates on every horizontal surface in a house, with the quiet determination of something that has no particular hurry, but no particular intention of stopping either. You dust the mantelpiece, the 2 framed photographs at either end, and the china shepherdess in the middle that belonged to your husband's grandmother, and that you have always found slightly unsettling but have never said so. The small wooden clock in its leather case that keeps good time and was a wedding gift from your husband's colleague at the firm, the 2 candlesticks that hold tapers you light at Christmas, and sometimes at dinner when you want the evening to feel like something more than an ordinary Tuesday. The photographs you dust carefully, a soft cloth over the glass and then a dry cloth to buff away the streak. Because photographs are not simply decorative objects, they are the people in them, and treating them carelessly would feel like a small impertinence. The furniture in the parlour takes paste wax twice a year, in spring and in fall, but between the waxings it takes a weekly conditioning with a cloth that has been lightly dampened with furniture oil. The oil you use is a simple mixture, lemon oil thinned with a little mineral spirits, made up in a small bottle that you refill from the larger bottles under the laundry room sink. It goes on in a thin film and dries to a soft sheen that makes the wood feel alive in a way that new wood often does not feel alive, because the furniture in this parlour is old enough to have absorbed the oil through multiple seasonal cycles and to have developed the particular depth of colour that comes from wood that has been cared for rather than simply used. When you rub the cloth along the grain of the side table that was your mother's before it was yours, you can feel the smoothness of it through the cloth, and the smell that rises as the oil goes on is warm and faintly citrus, and the smell of the word domestic in the most literal sense, the smell of a house that is cared for. The vacuum cleaner comes out for the rug, a Hoover constellation in a pale blue and cream that sits on its own round base like a small planet and is, in your opinion, one of the genuinely useful things that post-war American industry has produced. You drag it out of the coat closet and plug it into the outlet near the door and listen for the motor to reach its full whine before you begin, because you have learned that starting too early, before the suction is fully established, means you are moving the vacuum over the rug without actually collecting what you're trying to collect, which is the kind of wasted effort that a Monday cleaning does not have room for. The rug is an Axminster in a pattern of green and rust that was your choice and your husband's compromise, which is to say that you had a strong opinion and he had a weaker one, and the rug is the result of that specific negotiation. It is a good rug. It holds colour well, and it holds up to the children, and it is, when clean, exactly what a parlour rug should be, which is to say that it makes the room feel grounded and finished without calling attention to itself. You run the vacuum in overlapping rows the way you were taught to, turning at the end of each row with a pivot that has become automatic, the hose looped over your forearm to keep it from dragging on the clean portion you have already covered. The constellation's exhaust blows a faint warm breath along the floor as you go, and the motor fills the room with a sound that is loud but not unpleasant, a productive sound, a sound that means something is happening. And when you finish the rug and pull the cord from the outlet and wind it back around the machine, the room has changed in the specific way that a vacuumed room changes. The pile standing up slightly, the surface uniform, the invisible life of the rug put briefly in order. By now the morning has moved far enough toward noon that the quality of the light through the parlour window has shifted from the flat grey-white of early morning to something warmer and more direct, the late morning light of October coming in at an angle that catches the dust still moving in the air from the vacuuming and makes it visible, which is slightly dispiriting but also truthful, because the air in a house always has more in it than the eye can usually detect, and the light is simply being honest. You move to the windows and run a cloth along the sills, which have accumulated a fine grit from the fact that October windows are opened and closed more than summer windows, as the temperature shifts back and forth between the warmth of the day and the chill of the evening. The window panes themselves get the vinegar water treatment, a spray from the bottle, and a buff with a dry cloth moving in small circles until the glass is clear, and when you step back and look at the window from across the room, the light comes through it cleanly, without the smear of weeks that had been there before, and the room looks slightly brighter for it. You eat lunch standing at the kitchen counter, which you have been meaning not to do for years, and which you continue to do because sitting down in the middle of a cleaning day feels like surrendering a momentum that will be difficult to recover. A bologna sandwich on white bread, the kind of lunch that is not lunch so much as fuel, eaten quickly with one eye on the kitchen clock that now reads 12:43. You have the bedroom and the hallway floors still ahead of you, and the waxing if you are going to do the waxing, which you have not yet decided. The waxing is the kind of decision that depends on whether you have the energy for it, which will not be clear until you are standing at the edge of the parlour floor with the wax tin open in your hand, and either you do or you do not. The bedroom is a different kind of clean from the parlour, more intimate, more specific to the particular people who live in it. You strip the bed first, pulling the sheets off with the practiced efficiency of someone who has stripped many beds and knows that fighting the fitted sheet is a choice, not a necessity, provided you approach it from the right corner first. The sheets go in a pile on the floor beside the door, along with the pillowcases, and the bare mattress is left to breathe for a few minutes while you tackle the rest of the room, which is your habit, letting the mattress air while you dust and tidy. The mattress gets a sprinkle of baking soda after a few minutes, shaken from the box with the kind of even distribution that comes from practice, and left to sit while you make the bed with the clean sheets, the deep blue ones with the white trim that you pressed last Thursday, and that have been sitting folded in the linen closet since then, slightly cool to the touch when you unfold them, carrying the faint clean smell of the cedar block you keep in the closet to discourage moths. Making a bed properly is one of those things that is easy to do badly and satisfying to do well. The hospital corners your mother taught you, the sheet pulled taut and folded precisely at each corner and tucked under with a firm hand, produce a surface that stays tucked through the night in a way that loosely made beds do not. And you have been making beds this way since you were 12 years old and have made a bed no other way since. The pillowcases go on last, each pillow folded in half and pushed into its case in one smooth motion, then opened and shaken and placed at the head of the bed with the open end tucked neatly beneath. When you step back and look at the finished bed, its surface even and uncluttered, the pillows arranged, the spread centered, it looks like something that has been composed rather than merely assembled, which is what a well-made bed actually is. If you like the video so far, please leave us a like and a sub. A sub to the channel helps us make more videos for you to watch and keep the channel alive. You vacuum the baking soda off the mattress before you put the spread on, running the vacuum's upholstery attachment along the surface in slow stripes, and what lifts into the machine is slightly more than you care to think about closely. Mattresses accumulate things. This is simply a fact of mattresses, not a reflection on the people who sleep on them, and the baking soda has done what baking soda does in these circumstances, which is to absorb what it can and make the rest removable. The mattress, after the vacuuming, smells of nothing in particular, which is the smell you're aiming for, because a mattress that smells of nothing is a mattress that is doing its job unobtrusively, which is all you ask of it. The bedroom floor is hardwood, a little scuffed near the door where traffic has been heaviest, more lustrous near the windows where it gets less foot traffic, and the wax has held better. You sweep it first with the dust mop, the long-handled cotton mop head that you run across the floor in wide sweeping arcs, collecting the fine dust and hair that accumulates between cleanings. The dust mop is one of those tools that is so simple it has never needed improving. A stick with a cottony cloud at one end, and it does exactly what it has always done, which is to gather rather than redistribute, then the damp mop, wrung nearly dry, going over the floor in the same direction as the grain, lifting what the dry mop left. And then, because you have decided, standing there with the slightly damp smell of clean wood in your nose and the October light falling warm across the floor, that it is the week for waxing, you go and get the paste wax. Johnson's paste. Wax has been in your house since the week you moved in, which is not a decision you thought carefully about at the time, but that has turned out to be a good one. The tin is round and flat and the lid opens with a slight resistance that is satisfying, the way the lid of anything that keeps well opens with resistance, and inside is the wax, a yellowish beige solid with a faint carnauba smell that is both industrial and strangely pleasant. The smell of something that is going to make a surface shine. You apply it with a cloth folded into a pad, working it into the wood in small circles, one section of floor at a time, going on thin, going on even, because paste wax applied too thickly takes too long to dry and builds up into a yellowing layer that will eventually have to be stripped, and you have stripped floors before, and you know that it is work you do not want to create for yourself, twice when once was already sufficient. The wax goes on in a thin haze that makes the floor look temporarily worse, a pale cloudy film over the wood, and you leave it to haze while you work the next section, moving backward toward the door so that you're not walking over what you have already done. When you circle back to buff the first section with the buffing pad, a flat cotton pad that attaches to the handle of the mop, the wax polishes up with a sound like a whisper, the pad moving in long strokes along the grain, and the wood comes up from beneath the haze in its full colour, the deep amber of the boards near the window where the grain is tightest and most uniform, the slightly lighter honey colour of the boards near the closet, where a patch was replaced after the pipe repair some years back, and the whole floor unified by the wax into something that looks not new but well, which is a different thing, and, in a house that has been lived in, a better one. By the time you reach the hallway, it is mid-afternoon and your back is making a considered argument that you should perhaps sit down, but you're too close to finish to have that conversation productively, so you thank your back for its input and continue. The hallway is the part of the house that shows where fastest because it is the part that is always in motion, always being passed through, always collecting the residue of comings and goings. The linoleum here is a pale green with a faint pattern of interlocking ovals that your son calls fish scales, and that you have come to think of simply as the hallway floor, indistinguishable in your mind from the house itself. Linoleum is cleaned with a damp mop and a small amount of dish soap in warm water, never too much soap, because too much soap leaves a film that dulls the surface and attracts more dirt, and the goal is always to leave the floor slightly less hospitable to accumulation rather than more. You mop the hallway in 2 passes, the soapy water first and then the rinse, a clean bucket of warm water to go over the floor again and lift what the soap loosened. And by the time you are done, the linoleum has that specific clean sheen that linoleum has when it is clean, a softened gloss that is not quite reflective but that catches the light along its surface in a way that makes the hallway feel opened up and considered. The baseboards get a quick wipe too, a damp cloth along the top edge where dust settles in a small ridge that becomes visible when you look at it from the right angle. The baseboard dust is one of the things that separates a Monday cleaning from an ordinary tidy. The attention to the angles and edges and surfaces that are not at eye level but that register, subliminally, on everyone who lives in the house. The sense of completeness that comes from having cleaned a thing, even if no one will ever consciously notice. You stand at the end of the hallway at 3:47 in the afternoon and look back at the house around you. The kitchen is clean, the bathroom is clean, the parlour is dusted and vacuumed, and the windows are clear. The bedroom has fresh sheets and a waxed floor. The hallway is mopped. The smell of the house at this moment is the accumulated smell of baking soda and vinegar and lemon oil, and paste wax and clean laundry from the sheets, and the faint warmth of the autumn afternoon coming through the windows. And it is, in the particular way of things that have been worked for rather than simply happened, genuinely pleasant. Not the synthetic fragrance of a spray can product, or the chemical brightness of a commercial cleaner, but the smell of a house that has been attended to with the materials of a previous century, and the patience of a woman who was not in a particular hurry to finish, because finishing was never the point. The point was always the house itself, the maintenance of a space in which a family could live without the friction that accumulates when things are left to deteriorate, when surfaces become sticky and smells develop, and the small evidence of neglect begins to assert itself in ways that affect the mood of everyone who lives there. A clean house is not a moral achievement. It is not evidence of a superior character or a life well spent. It is simply a condition, one that requires effort to maintain and that makes the ordinary activities of a life, eating and sleeping and reading and talking and coming and going, slightly easier and slightly more pleasant than they would otherwise be. The women who understood this, who did Monday cleaning and Tuesday laundry and Wednesday ironing and all the rest of the weekly domestic architecture, were not doing it because they had been told to, or not only because they had been told to. They were doing it because they knew, in a way that the advertisements of the era rarely acknowledged, that the work was real and the results were real, and that the gap between a maintained house and an unmaintained one was a gap that everyone who lived inside it could feel every single day, even if they could not have said precisely what they were feeling or why. You put the cleaning things away in their proper places, the baking soda back on its shelf, the vinegar bottle back in its cabinet, the mop head hung to dry in the laundry room, and then you take your cup of tea to the kitchen table and sit down properly, both feet on the floor, the cup warm between your hands, and the house is quiet around you in the particular full quiet of something completed, which is different from the empty quiet of something not yet begun. Outside, somewhere down the block, you can hear the first school bus of the afternoon, which means you have approximately 12 minutes. You drink your tea. The laundry, which has been waiting in the hamper in the bathroom since Thursday, is a separate category from the Monday cleaning and deserves its own morning eventually. But today is the cleaning day and tomorrow, Tuesday, is the laundry day, and the distinction between these 2 days is not arbitrary. It is the product of a domestic calendar that was organised by women who understood that trying to do everything at once was a way of doing nothing particularly well, that the house had a rhythm and the rhythm had to be respected if the work was going to be accomplished with anything approaching efficiency. Monday is cleaning, Tuesday is laundry, Wednesday is ironing, Thursday is mending and marketing, Friday is baking because the weekend requires different things than the weekday, and the weekend's requirements need to be in the house by Friday afternoon. This calendar is not posted anywhere in this house. It is simply known, the way a housewife of this era knows her own kitchen, completely and by feel, without needing to consult anything external to herself. The smell of a clean house in the early 1950s is a compound smell, and it shifts through the rooms depending on what has been done and when. The kitchen this morning smells of baking soda first, the faint mineral clean of it, and then underneath that the coffee smell from the percolator that has been rinsed and set to dry in the rack, and then further underneath that the warm domestic smell that is every kitchen's permanent bass note, the smell of meals accumulated in the walls and the curtains and the painted wood of the cabinet doors. Not an unpleasant smell, not a smell of neglect, but the smell of a room that has been used daily for years for its stated purpose, and has absorbed that use into its surfaces. The bathroom smells of the hydrogen peroxide, which fades quickly, and then of the borax, which is almost no smell at all, and then of the particular clean cold water smell of recently scrubbed porcelain, which is one of the more satisfying smells in the domestic vocabulary because it is unambiguous and absolute. The smell of a thing that is clean in the bone-level way that porcelain can be clean when it has been properly attended to. The parlour smells of the lemon furniture oil, which has a warmth and a persistence that fills the room for an hour after the oiling, and that the afternoon sun coming through the clean windows carries across the room in a way that feels almost deliberate, as if the room itself has been scented, which in a sense it has been. You have been cleaning this house for 6 years, which means you have cleaned this stove approximately 300 times, this bathroom approximately 300 times, this parlour floor and these windows and these baseboards approximately 300 times. And there are 2 things that this repetition has done to you that are worth noticing. The first is that the work has become efficient in a way that it was not efficient in the beginning. When you first moved into this house, you were still learning the specific relationship between these surfaces and the products you were using to clean them, still discovering that the burner ring on the left front gas burner accumulated grease differently from the one on the right back because of the way the ventilation in this particular kitchen moved air across the range, still figuring out that the bathroom grout in the tile around the tub needed the hydrogen peroxide weekly rather than monthly if you wanted to stay ahead of the pink-tinged mildew that the winter humidity encouraged. You know those things now. The work takes less time than it used to because you no longer have to think about it in the same way. Your hands know what to do before your conscious mind has to direct them. The second thing the repetition has done is harder to name. It has given the work a different quality from the inside, a sense of ownership that is different from mere familiarity. When you clean the parlour floor on a Monday morning, you are not simply cleaning a floor. You are maintaining something that you have been maintaining for 6 years. Something whose condition is a matter of your specific and continuous attention. Something that has no particular history before you and will have a different history after you, but that belongs to you in the moment of its care in a way that is complete and practical and not sentimental. The wax on these floors is your wax, applied by your hands in your particular method over all these years, and the depth of colour the wood has developed is in part the consequence of that sustained attention. And knowing that is a specific kind of satisfaction that the advertising of the era was not very interested in representing, because it is not a satisfaction that requires a product. It requires only time and attention and the willingness to show up on Monday morning and do the work again. There is another smell in this house, one that you're so accustomed to that you no longer consciously register it, but that any visitor to the house would notice within 30 seconds of crossing the threshold. It is the smell of what this house is made of, the particular composition of wood and plaster, and the paint on the walls and the linoleum on the floors, and the accumulated domestic history of all the years of cooking and cleaning and washing, and the particular household soap you use, and the wax you put on the floors, and the cold cream you apply every night at the bathroom mirror. Every house has this smell, this molecular autobiography, and it changes slowly over years as the composition of the household changes, as the products change and the people change and the things that are cooked in the kitchen change. You no longer smell this house's smell because you are part of it and it is part of you. And the Monday cleaning is, among other things, a weekly revision of that smell, a freshening of the molecular record, a weekly assertion that this house is attended to, and that its smell is the smell of attendance and care rather than the other kind. The windows in this house are original to the construction, which means they are 10 years old, and their wooden sashes have been painted and repainted enough times that they do not open and close as smoothly as they once did, which is a problem most notably in the summer when you want cross-ventilation, and the windows require persuasion. But the glass in them is good. The old slightly wavy glass that distorts the view of the yard outside in a way that is so familiar you have stopped noticing the distortion. And when the glass is clean, and the October sun comes through at the right angle, the room inside is flooded with a warmth that is out of proportion to the temperature outside. A greenhouse warmth that lasts for about an hour in the late morning, and that you have, over 6 years, learned to work your cleaning schedule around, finishing the parlour dusting before the sun comes in at that angle, so that you can close the cleaning kit and simply be in the room during the warm hour, which is one of the small specific pleasures of this particular house in this particular season that is not replicated in any advertisement and belongs entirely to you. Your neighbour across the street, Elaine, whom you see once or twice a week when you are both at the clothesline at the same time, follows a cleaning schedule that is approximately the reverse of yours. She does her floors on Tuesday, and her bathrooms on Wednesday, and her kitchen on Thursday, and she does her laundry on Monday. Her reasoning, which she explained once over the back fence while you were both pinning sheets, is that Monday laundry means the weekend dirt is addressed immediately, while your reasoning, which you explained back, is that Tuesday laundry means the sheets can be taken off and washed while the bedroom is being cleaned, so that the freshly made bed with freshly laundered sheets is available by Tuesday afternoon, which seems to you the better sequencing. Neither of you is wrong. Both systems work. The differences between them are the product of two different women's experience of their own houses and their own domestic schedules, developed through years of trial and adjustment, and they are as individual as anything else in the domestic life, which is to say they are entirely individual and not in any way the product of the advertising that claimed to tell women how to clean. The advertising claimed a great deal in those years. It claimed that the right product made cleaning quick and effortless, that the woman using Tide or Ajax or Lysol was releasing herself from labour rather than applying it, that the chemistry in the bottle or the box was doing the work while she presided over the process with clean hands and a good dress. The women who actually did the work knew that this was not entirely true, not because the products were ineffective, most of them were genuinely effective, but because the products were tools and tools required the person using them to have skill and judgment and patience and a body willing to be put to use for 6 or 8 hours a week in the sustained physical work of maintaining a household. The product could not do that. The product was only useful in the hands of someone who knew what they were doing, and knowing what you were doing was the work, the quiet, lifelong work that was never photographed and never advertised and never described as skill, but that was all of those things. Your mother cleaned in a way that was not entirely the same as your way. She used more ammonia and less baking soda, partly because ammonia-based cleaners were more prominent in the 1930s and early 1940s than they were later, and partly because she trusted ammonia in the way that you trust baking soda, which is the trust of something learned early and confirmed repeatedly. She made her own furniture polish from a recipe her own mother had used, raw linseed oil and turpentine in a proportion that she kept in her head and never measured, and that produced a slightly different result from the commercial lemon oil you use, heavier, with a longer drying time and a deeper penetration into the wood, which she maintained produced a better long-term result even if it required more buffing. You used her formula for several years after you got married, and then you switched to the commercial product when it became available. Not because you thought it was better, but because it was simpler, and simplicity in a cleaning schedule that already had considerable complexity in it was its own value. The things your mother taught you about cleaning, and the things you have learned independently since, are two different categories, and you hold them separately in your understanding. From your mother, the sequence: kitchen first, then bathroom, then bedrooms, then common rooms, always working from the back of the house to the front, always working from the top of a surface to the bottom, the hydrogen peroxide on grout, the importance of a completely dry mop on a waxed floor, the method for making a bed with hospital corners, which her mother had learned from a nurse, and which your mother taught you by showing rather than telling, your hands learning the fold from her hands guiding them. These things are hers, even when your hands are doing them, and will be yours to pass forward in the same way they were passed to you. What you have learned independently, that the Constellation vacuum, despite its round design and its tendency to roll under furniture while you are trying to maneuver around it, picks up more than the previous upright vacuum you owned, which had a larger footprint but less suction in the corners, that the paste wax stays workable longest if you keep the tin in a warm place and does not stick to the cloth as badly if the cloth is slightly damp, that the specific angle of attack for removing a water ring from the wood of a table is slightly different from the angle for removing a surface scratch, and that confusing the two produces results that require additional remediation, that the half cup of coffee rule, half sitting and half standing, is not actually a hardship rule but is the empirically correct amount of morning coffee for the transition between household sleep and household work. Too little, and the morning's efficiency drops; too much, and you are cleaning the parlour with a caffeinated edge that makes you rush the buffing. These are small things. They are also taken together the sum of years of applied attention to a specific physical domain, which is the definition of expertise in any field, and which would be recognized as such in almost any field except the one where it actually lived, which was the American domestic household, where expertise was expected to be both invisible and universal, where every woman was assumed to know how to clean without having been taught and without having spent years learning, which was the most efficient possible way of ensuring that the knowledge was never named, never valued, and never paid for. The children will be home from school in a little under 2 hours. By then the house will be fully clean, the tea will be finished, and there will be something ready for dinner, a roast in the oven or soup on the stove, filling the clean kitchen with the kind of smell that brings people through the front door and into the kitchen without hesitation, the smell that turns the end of a school day into a specific homecoming rather than a generic return. That smell too is something you make. It does not arrive by itself. The specific domestic formulas that American women carried in their heads in the post-war period were not limited to the cleaning tasks we have already followed through the rooms of the house. They extended into every corner of domestic maintenance, every surface and material and condition that a house could present to the woman responsible for it, and the accumulated vocabulary of those formulas was a body of knowledge that was both broad and specific, both practical and inherited, both personal to each woman and connected, through the transmission of mother to daughter and neighbour to neighbour, to a shared tradition that ran back further than any advertisement and would outlast most of the products it occasionally incorporated. The stain removal knowledge was its own subcategory, with its own specific vocabulary and its own hierarchy of difficulty, organised around the principle that different substances required different treatments, and that treating a stain with the wrong method at the wrong moment was, in many cases, more damaging than leaving the stain untreated until the correct treatment could be applied. Every housewife in the 1950s had an internal stain chart, not written down anywhere, carried in the particular part of domestic memory that files away practical information alongside emotional information in the same easy access location, because in a household with children both categories of information are frequently urgent. Blood came out with cold water, never hot, because hot water set protein stains permanently into fabric in a way that no subsequent treatment fully undid. Fruit and berry stains came out with boiling water poured through the fabric from a height, the impact and the heat working together in a way that astonished anyone seeing it for the first time, the stains simply dissolving under the falling water as if it had never been there, which was one of the genuinely satisfying demonstrations of domestic chemistry. Grass stains required the cold water, and then a scrub with bar soap worked into the fabric and left to sit. Red wine, if caught immediately, came out with club soda and salt, the salt drawing the liquid up and the carbonation lifting what the salt left, and this worked well enough, often enough, that the combination had earned its place in the permanent domestic vocabulary. The iron was central to the domestic week in a way that is difficult to reconstruct for someone whose experience of ironing is the occasional pressing of a dress shirt or linen tablecloth. In the post-war American household, ironing was not occasional. It was Wednesday, a full day's worth of work because everything that came out of the washing machine went through the ironing board before it went into the drawer or onto the shelf or back onto a person. Cotton shirts were ironed, blouses were ironed, sheets were ironed, or at least the pillowcases were, and in households where the sheet was also ironed, which was not uncommon, the Monday laundry was considerably extended in its requirements. Children's school clothes were ironed, tablecloths were ironed. The domestic standard for ironed fabric was precise. Not a wrinkle reduction, but a wrinkle elimination. A flat and crisp surface that held its press through the day the item was worn, and that could only be produced by a combination of the right heat setting, the right amount of moisture in the fabric, and the right hand on the iron, moving with the grain of the fabric in strokes that were long and even, and that applied pressure without creasing. The starch was a related tool. Liquid starch, applied to fabric before it dried fully or sprayed on during ironing, stiffened cotton and linen in a way that extended the life of the press, and produced a crispness in a collar or a tablecloth that the fabric alone could not maintain. Men's shirts in the 1950s were expected to have stiff collars and stiff cuffs, and the women who ironed those shirts worked the starch into the collars and cuffs first, pressing them while slightly damp with a hot iron until the starch dried and the fabric stood at attention in the way that the era expected a well-maintained man's shirt to stand. This was a skill, and the women who had it knew they had it in the way that you know any skill that produces a visible and precise result. by the specific satisfaction of the collar that comes off the ironing board exactly right, stiff and smooth and perfectly shaped, ready for a week of mornings that will reward the Tuesday effort with a presentation that was, in the domestic vocabulary of the era, the evidence of a household run correctly. The window washing was a seasonal ritual separate from the weekly cleaning. Twice a year, in spring and in fall, the windows of the house were washed thoroughly inside and out, which in the case of a two-storey house with double-hung windows meant either a ladder or an arrangement with the windows tilted in their sashes, in the way that older window designs sometimes permitted, and in either case meant a day of work that was distinct from the regular weekly maintenance. The outside of windows collected different things from the inside: road dust and pollen, and the oxidised aluminum residue from window screens that were not made to last, and that left their faint grey tracks in the rain that ran down the glass and dried there. If you like the video so far, please leave us a like and a sub. A sub to the channel helps us make more videos for you to watch and keep the channel alive. The spring window washing was about removing the winter's accumulation, the coal soot in cities, the general grey that settled on everything through the months when the windows were closed and the house was sealed against the cold. The full window washing was about removing the summer's accumulation, the pollen and the dust of the open window months, and about preparing the glass to admit the lower autumn light as cleanly as possible, because winter was coming and the light would be at a premium. The vinegar and water solution that you used weekly on the bathroom mirror and the parlour windows was the same thing you used on the seasonal outside washing, perhaps slightly stronger, mixed with a little dish soap for the exterior glass that had more embedded grime to deal with. A squeegee, if you had one, made the outside windows go faster and cleaner than a cloth, and the squeegee technique was one of those pieces of domestic knowledge that distinguished the women who knew it from the women who did not, in the specific way that any efficient technique distinguishes its practitioners from those still doing things the slow way. You worked the squeegee from the top down in overlapping strokes, wiping the blade after each stroke on a dry cloth, and the window came clear in stripes that met each other precisely and left no streaks, which was the goal, the streak-free window that let the light through without the faint grey trails of dried cleaning solution that characterised a window cleaned with a cloth and without enough attention to the drying step. The home remedies for domestic surfaces occupied a space that was adjacent to the cleaning knowledge and partially overlapping with it, concerned with the maintenance and restoration of surfaces rather than simply their regular cleaning. A paste of toothpaste and water, applied with a soft cloth to a water ring on a wood surface and rubbed gently in the direction of the grain, removed many water rings without damaging the finish, which was a use of toothpaste that no toothpaste manufacturer advertised but that had been in circulation among housewives long enough that it qualified as inherited knowledge rather than discovery. Mayonnaise, applied to a wood surface and left overnight, moisturised the wood and sometimes restored a depth of colour in old wood that had dried out, which was the kind of domestic wisdom that was easily dismissed by anyone who had not tried it, and that could not be explained by the women who used it in terms that would satisfy a chemist, but that worked, which was the only criterion that mattered in a domestic context. White rings on wood tables, the kind left by condensation from a cold glass, came out with a mixture of cigarette ash and oil, the ash being mildly abrasive and the oil providing the lubrication that kept the abrasion from scratching the finish. And this worked well enough that it appeared in household management guides alongside the more conventional treatments, noted as the smoker's household tip, which suggested that the discovery had originated in precisely the domestic accident it was designed to address. The knowledge of these specific remedies was transmitted the same way all the cleaning knowledge was transmitted, through demonstration and conversation, and the kind of passed-along wisdom that moved between women with the particular speed that useful information moved through the networks of domestic life, through the backyard fence and the party telephone line and the church social and the club meeting and the kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon. This was, and is, a form of oral tradition in the older sense, knowledge that lived in people rather than on paper, that was revised and refined in transmission, that accumulated specific and local knowledge through the process of application and correction, and that was held by the women who carried it not as a collection of separate facts, but as an integrated understanding of the physical world of the house, an understanding that could be applied to new problems by extension from the principles behind the specific knowledge. Because the woman who understood why cold water worked on blood understood something about protein chemistry that she could apply to any protein stain, and the woman who understood why vinegar cut grease on glass understood something about acid and alkalinity that she could apply to any cleaning problem where those forces were relevant. This is expertise. It is informal and unrecognized expertise that was developed outside the structures that the era used to certify and credential knowledge. But it is expertise nonetheless, and the women who held it were experts in the most practical and useful sense, which is to say that they could solve the problems they were facing with the tools they had available and that they had developed. Over years of solving those problems, a general understanding of the principles behind the solutions that allowed them to extend their knowledge beyond the specific to the novel. The chemist at Procter & Gamble who developed Tide surfactant formula was operating in a different register, with different tools and different institutional support and a different relationship to the credentialing structures of the era. But in terms of the fundamental activity of applying accumulated knowledge to a specific physical problem in a domain they understood deeply, the distance between that chemist and the woman on her knees with the toothbrush and the hydrogen peroxide in the bathroom grout is not as large as the era imagined it to be. What separated them was not the quality of the knowledge or the rigour of its application. What separated them was the cultural context that decided whose knowledge counted as knowledge, whose expertise was recognised as expertise, and whose work was visible as work rather than as the natural expression of a role. That cultural context is what this conversation has been exploring, from the Monday morning kitchen to the orange Tide box to the sample case on the porch to the chemical smell in the closed kitchen. And what it reveals, if you look at it carefully and without the framing that the era preferred, is a world of domestic competence and domestic labour, and domestic knowledge that was vast and specific and largely invisible, maintained by women who were very good at their work and very poorly served by the culture that depended on it. The October afternoon is fading outside the kitchen window. The house is clean. The tea has been drunk. The children will be home any moment. Tomorrow there will be laundry, and the day after that there will be ironing, and the day after that there will be mending and marketing, and the day after that there will be baking, and then the weekend, and then Monday morning again, and the house that was attended to this morning will have accumulated another week of domestic life in its surfaces and its air and its floors, and the work will be there waiting, as it always is, as it always will be, patient and specific and requiring attention. This is the nature of maintenance work, all maintenance work, the work that keeps a thing in its condition rather than building toward a finished state. It has no destination, only continuation. The house is never permanently clean, only clean today, only clean for this afternoon and this evening, and as long as the people who live in it continue to live in it the way people do. The woman who understands this does not find it discouraging. She has made her peace with the continuity of the work, which is, in a domestic life, the same as making peace with the continuity of the life itself. The work and the life are not separate things. They are the same thing, experienced from the inside. In the autumn of 1946, an orange and yellow box appeared on the shelves of American grocery stores and changed the laundry room forever. It was not a subtle change, and it was not a gradual one. Tide arrived in American kitchens with the confidence of something that had been in development for 5 years and had been tested so thoroughly that the chemists who made it were certain, in that particular way that chemists are certain, that it was going to work. What they could not have predicted, or perhaps could have predicted but had not fully allowed themselves to believe, was that it was going to work so completely that it would transform the way American women thought about clean, about fabric, about the physical effort of laundry, and about what they were entitled to expect from a product that came in a box. The story of Tide is, at its core, the story of a company that understood something about American domestic life in the post-war period that most companies were only beginning to grasp. Procter & Gamble, by the mid-1940s, was already a significant force in American consumer goods. They had soap, Ivory, which had been floating in American bathtubs since 1879, and whose slogan, 99 and 44/100% pure, was one of the most recognised advertising phrases in the country. They had Crisco, which had replaced lard in countless American kitchens since 1911, with the promise of being vegetable-based, and therefore, in the language of the era, scientific and modern. They knew how to make things that people used every day, and they knew how to make people want to use them. But laundry was different. Laundry in the 1940s was still largely a hand operation in many American households, even those that owned washing machines. because the washing machines of the era were not the sealed automatic appliances that would come later, but were open-top agitator machines that required the homemaker to add water, add soap, agitate the clothes, drain, refill, rinse, drain again, and then wring the clothes through a hand-cranked or mechanical wringer before hanging them to dry. The soap used in these machines was generally a bar soap grated into the water, or a soap powder that had been designed for hand washing and that performed tolerably in machines but was not really engineered for them. The clothes came out acceptably clean in the way that clothes washed with hand soap came out acceptably clean, which is to say that they were less soiled than before they were washed, which was the goal, but that they did not always come out bright, did not always come out soft, and occasionally came out with a grey cast that the women who laundered them accepted as an inevitable consequence of the washing process, rather than a problem that could be solved. The chemists at Procter & Gamble did not accept it as inevitable. They had been working since the late 1930s on what they called a heavy-duty synthetic detergent, a product that was not soap in the traditional sense but was instead a surfactant, a compound that worked by different chemistry than soap, that was effective in both hard water and soft water, that did not leave the mineral deposits and soap scum that traditional soap left in hard water regions, and that was aggressive enough in its cleaning action to remove the kinds of embedded soil that a decade of machine washing with conventional soap had simply redistributed rather than removed. The project was called Project X in the company's internal documentation, and it was run out of the Ivorydale Research Facility in Cincinnati with the kind of institutional commitment that Procter & Gamble was capable of bringing to a problem it had decided was worth solving. The man most closely associated with the development of Tide within the company's own history was a chemist named David Byerly, who worked on the surfactant chemistry that would eventually give Tide its particular cleaning profile. But the project involved dozens of researchers across multiple years, and the product that emerged from those years was not the work of a single moment of insight, but the accumulated result of thousands of small tests and adjustments, of formulations tried and discarded, of fabric samples evaluated under laboratory conditions and then under household conditions, and of a running argument between the chemists, who wanted maximum cleaning power, and the manufacturing engineers, who wanted a formula that could be produced in quantities large enough to supply a national market without the cost spiralling out of any reasonable relationship to what a consumer would pay for a box of laundry product. That argument was never fully resolved, because it is the nature of such arguments that they are never fully resolved. What emerged was a compromise that both sides could live with, and it turned out to be, in the American market, something close to a revolution. Tide launched nationally in the autumn of 1946. Procter & Gamble had been careful about the rollout, testing the product in limited markets in the years before national distribution to understand how consumers would respond to it, and the consumer response, even in those early tests, had been striking. Women who tried Tide came back for it with a consistency that exceeded what the company had seen with most new product launches. The word they used, repeatedly, in the focus groups and consumer surveys of the era, was bright. Tide made the whites bright. It made the colours bright. It made fabrics that had been laundered with conventional soap for years and that had taken on the specific greyness of long-term soap build-up suddenly look, in the words of one early consumer tester in the company's files, the way they did when they were new. This was not a small thing. For a generation of American women who had been doing laundry every week since they were teenagers, who had watched their white shirts and their children's school blouses and their tablecloths and their bed linens gradually acquire the yellowish-grey tinge of hard water and soap residue, the experience of washing something in Tide and watching it come out of the machine looking genuinely clean was, by multiple accounts, astonishing in a way that is difficult to convey to someone who has grown up using synthetic detergents and has no reference point for what laundry looked like before them. The advertising for Tide, which Procter & Gamble launched, with a budget and an intensity that was unusual even for a company accustomed to significant advertising investments, played directly to this experience. The orange and yellow box was impossible to miss on a shelf. The tagline, "Tide's in, dirt's out," was simple enough to be understood immediately and memorable enough to stay. But the more sophisticated truth about Tide was not in the advertising, it was in the chemistry. What Tide did that conventional soap could not do was to work in any water. Hard water, which was the reality in a significant portion of the American Midwest and West where mineral content was high, had always been the enemy of soap-based laundry products, because the minerals in the water reacted with the soap to form calcium and magnesium salts, what consumers called soap scum, which deposited on the fabric being washed and made it feel stiff and look dull. Tide's synthetic surfactant molecules were not affected by hard water minerals in this way. They moved through the water, surrounded soil particles, and lifted them from the fabric regardless of what the water was carrying, which meant that a woman in Omaha using Tide was getting the same result as a woman in a soft water region, which was not something that any conventional soap-based product could promise. The phosphate builder in Tide was the other part of the formula that made it work as well as it did. Builders are compounds added to detergents to enhance the effectiveness of the surfactant, and the sodium tripolyphosphate that Procter & Gamble used in Tide was particularly effective at sequestering the hard water minerals that would otherwise interfere with the surfactant, at softening the water, and at providing an alkaline environment in which the surfactant worked most efficiently. The phosphate content in Tide was, by the standards of the era, remarkably high, and it was this phosphate that was responsible for a significant part of Tide's superior cleaning performance relative to its competitors in the early years. It was also, as would become clear a generation later, the beginning of a different kind of problem, but that story belongs to a later decade and a different conversation. In the years immediately following its national launch, Tide did something that most consumer products do not do. It created a new category. Before Tide, laundry products were understood as a single category, soap-based products that cleaned clothes with varying degrees of effectiveness and that were more or less interchangeable in their basic function. After Tide, the category split. There were synthetic heavy-duty detergents, and there was everything else, and the everything else began, almost immediately, to reorganize itself in Tide's direction. Competitors, including Lever Brothers with Rinso and Colgate-Palmolive with their own formulations, scrambled to produce synthetic detergents that could compete with Tide's cleaning performance, and within a decade the laundry soap that had been a fixture of American households since the 19th century had been largely displaced in favour of products that worked on the same synthetic chemistry that Tide had pioneered. By 1950, Tide had become the best-selling laundry product in America, a position it would hold for decades, with a consistency that became almost embarrassing to its competitors. The market share numbers that Procter & Gamble accumulated with Tide in the 1950s and early 1960s were, by any standard of the packaged goods industry, extraordinary. The kind of market share that advertising alone could not produce, and that required the underlying reality of a product that actually did what it said it was going to do. Women who tried Tide and had the experience of genuinely bright laundry were not going back to their previous product. The loyalty was not manufactured. It was earned, which is the more durable kind. The cultural effect of Tide, which is harder to measure than market share but no less real, was to raise the standard of what clean laundry was supposed to look like. Before Tide, a woman who looked at her freshly washed sheets and found them a little grey, a little flat, a little lacking in the crisp whiteness that she associated with the ideal of the thing, had no particular recourse. This was what clean sheets looked like. This was the best you could do with the products available and the time and effort you were prepared to invest. Tide changed that calculus. Suddenly the ideal was achievable, or at least more achievable than it had been. And once an ideal becomes achievable, it stops being an ideal and becomes a standard, and standards, once established, have a way of becoming obligations. This shift in expectation was not entirely comfortable for the women who were living inside it. The post-war American housewife was already operating under a considerable weight of expectation. The cultural pressure to maintain a home that met the standards of the era's advertising imagery, which was a standard that advertising imagery had been steadily inflating since the 1930s. Now the standard for laundry had moved too, and the products to meet it were available on the grocery store shelf in an orange box, which meant that the only barrier between the woman and the gleaming white laundry of the advertisements was her own effort and willingness to purchase. In a cultural environment that was already inclined to read a woman's domestic performance as a reflection of her character and her care for her family, the availability of Tide made the bright white tablecloth less of an achievement and more of an expectation, and the absence of it less forgivable. Procter & Gamble was aware of this dynamic, or at least they were aware of the advertising version of it, and their marketing in the 1950s reflected a careful navigation of the line between promising that their product made laundry easier and implying that using their product was simply what a conscientious woman did. The advertising was almost never threatening or shaming, because threatening and shaming were not effective advertising strategies In a market where women made the purchasing decisions and women responded better to aspiration than to guilt, at least in the short term. But the aspiration itself, the smiling woman and the pile of snowy white linens, and the husbandly approval implied in the background of every print advertisement, contained within it a set of standards that were connected to Tide's chemistry in a way that the product itself could not be blamed for, but that the product's existence had made unavoidable. The automatic washing machine, which was becoming available to American consumers in meaningful numbers through the 1950s, changed the laundry equation again, and Tide adapted to it. The top-loading automatic washer, with its enclosed tub and automatic cycle and spin-dry rather than wringer-dry function, was designed for synthetic detergents in a way that the old agitator machines had not been, and Procter & Gamble, which had been in conversation with the major appliance manufacturers since the early days of automatic washer development, had positioned Tide to be the product that worked best in the new machines. The instruction sheets that came with new Kenmore and Maytag and General Electric washers in the 1950s frequently mentioned Tide by name, or described a product specification that was essentially Tide's formulation, and the synergy between the appliance companies and Procter & Gamble was not exactly accidental. The women who bought those washers and poured Tide into them in the amount specified on the box were participating in something larger than laundry. They were participating in the post-war transformation of American domestic life, the shift from labour-intensive hand operations to mechanical assistance, from the Monday full-day laundry production to something that could be done in 2 hours with a machine doing most of the physical work. This transformation was real, and it was genuinely significant in terms of the time and energy it freed from the domestic schedule. But it was also, characteristically, immediately filled with other demands, because the time freed by the automatic washer was rarely described in the advertising of the era as time for leisure. It was described as time available for other domestic tasks, better meals, more attentive mothering, a cleaner house, a more perfectly maintained family. The washing machine gave women back their afternoons, and the culture immediately reinvested those afternoons in a different set of obligations. Tide is still on American shelves. It has been reformulated dozens of times since the 1940s. The phosphate content reduced and eventually replaced in response to environmental regulation. The surfactant chemistry updated with each generation of fabric and machine technology. The scent varied, and the form varied. Pods and liquids and powders and ultra-concentrates. But the orange box is still recognisable on the shelf, and the name is still the most recognised name in laundry products in the American market. What remains consistent is the promise, which is the same promise that was made in 1946, that the wash will come out brighter than it went in, that the effort and the chemistry together will produce something that looks like the ideal, which is all any cleaning product has ever really promised, and all that any cleaning product, if it is honest, can actually deliver. The women who bought those first orange boxes in 1946 had no particular way of knowing that they were purchasing the beginning of a new standard, that the acceptable grey of their previous clean laundry was about to be reclassified as not quite clean enough. They were simply buying a product that worked better than what they had been using, which seemed, at the time, like an uncomplicated improvement. It was, in its way, exactly that. And it was also, in another way, the beginning of a conversation about standards and effort and the relationship between the two that American domestic culture is still having, in one form or another, today. The American laundry had been a Monday operation for as long as the Monday laundry had been a thing, which was long enough that by the middle of the 20th century it had acquired the quality of a natural law rather than a historical practice. Monday was wash day. This was not because Monday was the most convenient day for laundry in any absolute sense. It was because the sequence of the domestic week had been organised around it. Sunday was the day the family wore its best clothes, and Monday meant those clothes needed washing before the next Sunday, and the rest of the week's laundry accumulated from there, and the ironing that followed the laundry was on Tuesday, and the clean-ironed clothes were available for the rest of the week. Change Monday laundry and you changed the whole sequencing, which was why Monday laundry persisted as a practice well into the era of automatic washing machines, even after the physical constraints of the old laundry process had been substantially reduced. The old laundry process was formidable. Before the widespread availability of electric wringer washers, and certainly before automatic machines, doing the Monday laundry in an American household meant carrying water if the house was not on municipal supply, heating it if it was cold, filling a tub or washing machine by hand, washing the clothes in whatever order the logic of soil level required, lightest and least soiled first so that the wash water remained usable for as long as possible, wringing each piece by hand or through a mechanical wringer, rinsing with clean water, wringing again, and carrying the wet laundry to the line. This was hours of work that required sustained physical effort and produced as its primary byproduct an exhausted woman and a household full of wet laundry. The washboard and tub version of this process, which was still common in rural areas and in households without electricity well into the 1930s and 40s, was sufficiently demanding that the Monday laundry was often described by the women who did it as the hardest day of the domestic week. Harder even than the Friday baking or the Thursday ironing, because the laundry involved moving the most weight through the most water with the least mechanical assistance. By the time Tide launched in 1946, the mechanical situation had improved considerably in most American households. The electric wringer washer had been widely available since the 1920s, and by the post-war period a significant majority of American households that had access to electricity had at least a wringer washer, even if the full automatic machine was still beyond their budget or not yet available in their area. If you like the video so far, please leave us a like and a sub. A sub to the channel helps us make more videos for you to watch and keep the channel alive. The wringer washer reduced the physical labour of laundry without eliminating it. You still loaded the tub with water and soap, still added the clothes and ran the agitator, still fed the wet clothes through the wringer to remove as much water as possible, still carried the clothes to the line. But the scrubbing, the most physically demanding part of the old process, was replaced by the agitator's mechanical action, and this was a genuine improvement in the physical experience of Monday laundry. What Tide offered into this changed but still demanding process was not a labour-saving device in the mechanical sense, but a quality improvement in the result, and this proved to be, for the women who tried it, exactly what they wanted. The automatic machines would come and reduce the labour further, but Tide was addressing a different problem, the problem of the grey wash, the problem of the flat and uninspiring laundry that came out of even the best mechanical process when the cleaning agent was conventional soap. And this problem turned out to be one that American women had been living with so long that they had ceased to identify it as a problem and had reclassified it as an inevitability, which meant that when Tide removed it, the response was not simply satisfaction, but something closer to revelation. The women who appeared in Tide's advertising in the 1950s were not real women in the sense of being specific documented people, but they were real in the sense of representing a genuine consumer experience, the experience of the bright wash that actual women were having with actual Tide. The advertising was not inventing a benefit that did not exist. It was amplifying a benefit that did exist, and in the amplification it was also raising the standard for what the benefit was supposed to look like, which is what advertising characteristically does, but in this case the underlying benefit was real enough to support the amplification, without the whole structure collapsing into obvious falsity. Women bought Tide, women kept buying Tide, and what they were buying was not the idealized image on the box but the actual chemistry inside it. The surfactant and the builder and the specific combination of molecules that moved through hot water and lifted soil from fabric, and left the fabric clean in a way that the soap it had replaced could not quite manage. Procter & Gamble's investment in Tide was not limited to the product itself. The company invested heavily in understanding how the product was being used and what the users of the product wanted from it, which was a research methodology that was relatively new to the consumer goods industry in the 1940s, and that Procter & Gamble developed with a thoroughness that gave them advantages over competitors who were still relying more heavily on advertising intuition than on consumer research. The data they gathered, through surveys and home visits, and the kind of structured observation of domestic laundry practice that must have seemed extraordinary to the women being observed, told them things about laundry behaviour that were useful not just for marketing but for product development. Women had different water hardness at home, women washed at different temperatures, women had different ideas about the relationship between the amount of product used and the quality of the result, many of them using significantly more product than was necessary because more product felt like more cleaning, which was an understanding about consumer behaviour that would influence Tide's packaging and instruction design for decades. The Tide story connects to the larger story of American consumer goods in the post-war period in ways that go beyond laundry. It was one of the first major consumer products to be developed using systematic market research, one of the first to create a new product category rather than simply competing within an existing one. and one of the first to demonstrate that a premium-priced consumer product in a category previously associated with commodity goods could achieve and maintain market dominance if the product's performance advantage was real and consistent. The lessons Procter & Gamble learned from Tide about research and product development and consumer communication and category creation shaped the company's approach to product development for a generation and influenced the broader consumer goods industry in ways that are still visible in how household products are developed and marketed today. There is a specific pleasure, familiar to anyone who has ever used baking soda on a stovetop or vinegar on a mirror or paste wax on a hardwood floor, in the knowledge that a cleaning method has been proved effective over many decades and many kitchens and many hands, that what you're doing when you apply the baking soda or the vinegar is participating in a long, continuous, mostly unwritten tradition of domestic knowledge that was developed and refined by women who were paying close attention to the results of their own work and who passed forward what worked and let go of what did not. This tradition predates Tide by a considerable margin. It predates the packaged goods industry entirely, which is why the things at its core, the baking soda and the vinegar and the borax and the lemon juice and the salt and the hydrogen peroxide, are all things that were available to women before there was a consumer product industry to tell them what to use, and that remain effective today regardless of what the consumer product industry has developed in the meantime. The relationship between these older methods and the newer chemical products of the post-war era was not adversarial in the way that the advertising sometimes implied. A woman who kept baking soda on her shelf and also bought Tide was not contradicting herself. She was using the right tool for each job, which is the original domestic wisdom, the thing that all the recipes and formulas and tips and tricks are pointing toward when you follow them back to their source. The right tool for the stovetop is different from the right tool for the laundry, and the right tool for the laundry in a hard water region might be Tide in a way that it would not be if you lived in a soft water region, and the right tool for the bathroom grout is hydrogen peroxide in a way that it is not for the bathroom floor, where the borax is the right tool. This is not complicated, it is knowledge, the kind of knowledge that the era's advertising worked very hard to replace, with the simpler message that the right product from the right company did everything, which was convenient for the companies and not entirely accurate, and which some women believed and some women worked around by continuing to keep both the baking soda and the Tide on their shelves. What the saleswoman at the door understood, and what the woman behind the door understood, even when neither of them would have said it in exactly these words, was that the transaction happening on that porch was not primarily about brushes or polishes or drain cleaners. It was about domestic competence and the desire for domestic competence, about a woman looking at another woman's sample case and recognizing the potential for improvement in her own domestic situation, and about a woman with that sample case understanding that the improvement was real and specific and achievable, and that her job was to make the connection between the product in the case and the specific problem in the kitchen as clear and as compelling as possible. The cleaning product business of the 1950s in all its forms, from the grocery store shelf to the door-to-door saleswoman to the magazine advertisement, was fundamentally in the business of promising to help women do a job that was already very demanding, and when the promise was honest and the product delivered, the relationship that resulted was a real one, grounded in real utility. The cleaning demonstration that the Stanley dealer gave in a woman's kitchen in 1953, with the vegetable brush and the bottle brush and the household cleaner, was not theatre. It was applied knowledge, the knowledge of which product addressed which domestic problem and how to make that application visible and legible. When the dealer showed the cleaning product foaming in the drain, it was showing something real about the product's chemistry, something that the woman watching the demonstration could connect directly to a problem she had been having, and that the product was genuinely capable of addressing. This is a more honest transaction than most advertising, which shows the result without the mechanism, and it is one of the reasons that door-to-door sales persisted as a viable model long after it became technically unnecessary, because the demonstration was, and remains, a more convincing form of product communication than an advertisement, and the connection between the dealer and the customer, however brief and however commercial, was a more human form of product recommendation than a photograph in a magazine. You have 30 seconds at a door, possibly less. This is the thing you learned in your first week, not from any training manual, because the training manual said you had 2 minutes, but from the actual doors, which proved themselves to be considerably less patient than the manual had suggested. 30 seconds from the moment you hear the footsteps inside to the moment the door either opens fully or does not open at all, and everything you are going to accomplish today happens inside that window, or it does not happen. Your sample case is at your feet on the porch, the black square case with the brass latches that you've carried up and down every street in this part of town since September, and it weighs more than it should because you have learned not to leave samples in the car because women will ask to see the thing you have left in the car, and the walk back to the car and then back to the door is just long enough for a woman who was on the fence to decide that the fence looks more comfortable than either side of it. So the case comes to every door, all 12 pounds of it, and you carry it without adjustment in your posture, because adjustment in posture suggests the case is heavy, and suggesting the case is heavy suggests weakness, and weakness does not sell brushes. You're a Stanley Home Products dealer, which means you're one of approximately 60,000 women across America in this particular year of the early 1950s who have taken on a Stanley territory and who go door to door with cases full of brushes and mops and household chemicals and a cleaning demonstration that can, if everything goes well, turn a politely answered door into a 2-hour kitchen performance that ends with a signed order form and sometimes with a hostess party scheduled that will bring you 10 or 12 more doors all at once in a living room with coffee and cookies already on the table before you arrive. The hostess parties are the gold. The door-to-door is how you pay for the sample case until you have enough hostess parties going, that the parties start to generate more parties, which is when the business becomes, in the language of your regional manager, sustainable, meaning that it generates enough money to justify the hours and the gas and the babysitting and the 12-pound case. You hear footsteps. They're coming closer to the door. You straighten, not dramatically, not the way someone straightens when they know they are being watched and want to perform straightening, but internally, the kind of straightening that reorganizes your face and your shoulders and your voice all at once. The way you have learned to reorganize them in the time it takes footsteps to travel from the back of a house to its front door. By the time the door opens, you are already the person you need to be, which is a warm, capable, unhurried woman who has something genuinely useful to show you and who is not in any particular hurry to go anywhere else, because this conversation is exactly where she wants to be. The woman who opens the door is wearing an apron. This is a good sign, not because women who wear aprons are better customers than women who do not, but because an apron means she was in the middle of something, probably something in the kitchen, and women in the middle of something in the kitchen are women who are actively thinking about their domestic work, and who are therefore more likely to be receptive to a conversation about products that make domestic work go better. This is a heuristic, not a rule. You have had your best sales of the season to women who open the door in their good dresses on the way out to a garden club meeting, and you have had doors shut firmly in your face by women in aprons who had no interest in anything you had to show them and communicated this without any ambiguity whatsoever. But the apron helps. You introduce yourself the way you always introduce yourself, your first name and the Stanley name and the simple honest statement that you have some products to show her, and you will take up no more of her time than she is willing to give you. You do not say, "I would like to show you some products," because that construction, which is what the training manual recommended, contains within it a kind of supplication that you have learned does not serve you well. You say you have products to show, present tense, a statement of fact rather than a request for permission, and this small grammatical difference, which took you 3 weeks on the doors to understand, makes the next 30 seconds go more smoothly. She lets you in. She does not always let you in. On the days when she does not let you in, you smile and thank her for her time, and you put a small Stanley brochure in the gap of the door before it closes, and you walk back down the porch steps with your 12 pounds, and you cross the street or go next door or turn the corner and you knock on the next door. Because this is how it works, and the women who last in this business are the women who learn to hear a closed door as information about that house on that day, and not as information about themselves or their product or their future. The closed door is a closed door. The next door is a different door. But this door has opened, and you're inside the hallway now, and the house is already telling you things. The smell of the house tells you something. The warm kitchen smell that means she was just baking, or has just finished breakfast. The faint ammonia edge of a recently mopped floor. The specific tobacco note of a house where someone smokes in the evenings. The visual tells you more. The condition of the hallway floor, whether the baseboards have been recently wiped, or have acquired that ridge of dust that develops when baseboards go unattended. Whether there are shoes piled by the door in a way that suggests this is not a house where order is the primary value, or whether the shoes are lined against the wall in pairs, which suggests something different about this woman's relationship to her domestic space. You are reading the house the way you read a face, for what it is telling you about the person who lives inside it, because the products you sell are the products that this specific house needs, and the only way to know what those products are is to pay attention to what the house is saying. She leads you to the kitchen and you follow her, your case in your hand, and you set it on the floor near the kitchen table when she indicates you should sit, because you do not open the case until she has indicated her willingness to spend some time with you, and this indication is not always verbal. Sometimes it is the act of sitting down across from you. Sometimes it is the kettle going on for tea, which is the domestic equivalent of a flag going up, an announcement of hospitality and leisure, of a woman who has decided that she can afford the next 20 minutes. Sometimes it is simply the way she looks at the case, which is a look of genuine curiosity, even when the look is accompanied by a preliminary statement that she's really very busy and cannot spend much time, because women who are genuinely busy and have genuinely no interest do not lead you to the kitchen. They close the door. Your opening demonstration is the vegetable brush. This is a strategic choice, and has been a strategic choice since your first months on the doors, not because the vegetable brush is your best product or your most profitable product, but because it is the product that everyone can immediately understand the use of, that requires no particular explanation or persuasion. That is simply a well-made brush for scrubbing vegetables, better than what most women have, obviously better in the way that a well-made thing is obviously better than a lesser version of the same thing, and that begins the conversation in a place of agreement. She agrees that a good vegetable brush is useful. You agree. The case is open, and the conversation has begun, and you are already doing what you came to do, which is to show her something that will make her domestic work go better, and the fact that this eventually produces an order form is simply the formal acknowledgement of an agreement that has already been reached. You show her the bottle brush next, and then the hearth brush, which she may or may not have a hearth for, but you show it anyway because it is a brush of sufficient elegance that women who do not have fireplaces often find themselves wanting one, and women who do have fireplaces invariably need one. The hearth brush is one of those Stanley products that sells itself once it is out of the case, and in a woman's hands, because the craftsmanship is visible and the weight is right, and the bristles have a quality that distinguishes them from what you can buy at the hardware store, and women who have been frustrated by a hardware store hearth brush that sheds bristles into the grate will recognize this quality immediately. The cleaning products come later in the demonstration, after the brushes have established a foundation of credibility. If she's willing to spend more than 45 minutes with you, you bring out the Stanley Bright all-purpose cleaner and the Stanley furniture polish and the Stanley drain opener, each demonstrated if she is willing to demonstrate, and you have learned that she is frequently willing because the demonstration is genuinely interesting. The way the drain opener foams when it contacts water in the sink drain is genuinely interesting. The kind of chemistry that is visible and immediate, and that makes the product's effectiveness legible without any need for explanation. You show her the drain opener and she watches the foam rise in the drain, and she looks at you with an expression that says she wants 2 bottles, and you note this on your order pad and continue. The order pad is a document of this particular woman's domestic life in the most specific possible terms. What she needs, what she's willing to invest in, what she's been doing without and has been meaning to do something about for months. You have been trained to think of the order as a service and not a sale, which is a distinction that feels like company language until you have been on the doors long enough to understand that it is actually accurate. Because the women who call you back 6 months later for a reorder are not calling because they felt pressured into their first order. They are calling because the product worked the way you said it would work. Because the bottle brush, or the drain opener, or the furniture polish addressed the specific domestic problem it was supposed to address, and because that specific problem is now gone from the house in a way that it was not before you came. The hostess party is the question that every successful demonstration leads toward, and you raise it at the right moment, which is not at the beginning and not at the end, but somewhere in the middle, when she's been persuaded of the products but the conversation is still warm and open, when she's still in the feeling of this is a useful and pleasant way to spend an afternoon, before the conversation has begun its natural movement toward closure. You explain the hostess program in terms of what she gets rather than what you need from her, which is how it works best, how she can earn free products for every person who orders at her party, how she can host it on any evening that is convenient, how you will bring everything including the demonstration and the order forms and the coffee cake if she wants. Actually, you bring the coffee cake. This is a thing you have found works better than leaving it to the hostess, because the coffee cake you bring is always the same reliable coffee cake, and the one the hostess makes is sometimes remarkable and sometimes dry as chalk, and the consistency matters for the mood of the party. Some women say yes to the party immediately, before you have finished explaining the programme, because they have been to a Stanley party at a neighbour's, and they understand what they are agreeing to, and they want the free products, and they like the social occasion that the party creates. A legitimate gathering with a clear purpose that is neither the charged formality of a dinner party, nor the slightly shapeless quality of a coffee clatch. The Stanley party has structure and entertainment, which is what makes it, for certain women, a genuinely appealing prospect. Others say they will think about it, which sometimes means yes and sometimes means no, and you have learned to hear the difference in the texture of the phrase, the way it is said, and whether her eyes stay on yours when she says it, or whether they go briefly to the window or the door, and you leave those women a card and you thank them for their time and you go, not pressing, because pressing produces resistance, and resistance closes doors that were almost open. Some days are good days and some days are the other kind. A good day in the 1950s door-to-door business is a day when 3 doors open fully, and 2 of the 3 produce orders and 1 produces a party booking, and you drive home in the late afternoon with your case lighter than it was when you left, and your order forms filled and your commission calculated in your head, and the number good enough to cover the babysitting and the gas and the new stocking you snagged on a porch nail this morning and still leave something over. The other kind of day is when it rains and the streets are empty, and the doors that do open are opened by women who are polite and firmly uninterested, and you drive home with your case exactly as heavy as it was when you left, and your order form still blank and the number you calculate in your head not quite reaching the expenses. You have been doing this long enough to understand that the ratio between the good days and the other kind is not random. It is responsive to effort and to attention, to the quality of your demonstrations and to the routes you choose and to the way you read a door from the outside before you knock on it. The small clues that suggest whether this is a house where your knock is likely to produce an open door or a closed one. A house with a well-maintained garden tells you something. A house where the porch furniture is arranged with care tells you something. A house where the curtains are clean and properly hung tells you something about the woman inside and her relationship to her domestic space, and her willingness to invest in the products that maintain it. These are not certainties, only tendencies, but tendencies, worked consistently over enough doors, produce results that look a good deal like consistency. What you're doing on these streets, in these houses, with your £12 case and your vegetable brush and your order forms, is something that the era does not have a very precise name for. It is not a career in the way that the careers of the era are described, the kind that require degrees and offices and business suits and certain kinds of social recognition. It is not entirely a job, because you set your own hours and your own route, and you answer to no one in the daily operational sense, though you answer to your regional manager in the sense that your sales numbers are tracked and compared and discussed. It is not quite a business, though it has the structure of one. It is something in between all of these things, a way of earning money that is available to women who cannot be at a desk at 9 in the morning, because there is a child at home or a parent who needs attention, or a domestic schedule that does not accommodate a fixed location and fixed hours, but who can be at a door at 10 o'clock and at another door at 10:30, and at a living room full of women with coffee cups at 7 on a Tuesday evening. Tens of thousands of women built what functioned as real economic independence from these door-to-door businesses in the post-war period, in an era when the cultural conversation about women and work rarely acknowledged the existence of this kind of work, and when the domestic product companies that organised these networks were happy to describe their dealers as housewives, with a little side income rather than as the backbone of a national sales force that moved product, with an efficiency that the company's own advertising budgets alone could never have replicated. You are, in the company's own materials, a homemaker sharing quality products with your neighbours. You are, in the reality of your own life, a saleswoman who is very good at her job, and who has worked out through years of doors and demonstrations and party bookings a set of skills that are genuinely sophisticated and genuinely useful, and that the era simply does not have language for, because the era was not particularly interested in looking closely at what the women on the other side of its own doors were actually doing. You close your case at 5 o'clock in the afternoon and you drive home in the car that your commissions have been paying for these past 2 years, and you pick up your daughter from the neighbours, and you start dinner with one hand while you add up your day with the other, the orders in one column and the expenses in another, and the number at the bottom of the page is the number that has been paying for your daughter's new shoes and your husband's dental work, and the small amount you have been putting into a savings account that he does not know about, not because it is a secret exactly, but because it is yours, in the specific way that a woman of this era could have a thing that was hers, and you are not ready to have a conversation about it that would make it into something else. You close the order book. The dinner is almost ready. Your daughter is at the kitchen table doing her homework with the kind of industry that 7-year-olds bring to homework, which is to say with periodic bursts of genuine concentration, interrupted by requests for juice and observations about the neighbour's dog. You look at her, and you look at the kitchen, and you look at the order book on the counter, with today's numbers in it, and something in the accounting of the day feels right. Not perfect, but right. The particular rightness of a person who has done a thing she's capable of doing, and done it with attention, and produced a result that is equal to the effort. This is not the story the era was telling about women and work and domestic life, but it is the story that was happening in kitchens and living rooms across the country, in the years when the official story was still very confident about what women were for and very uninterested in what women were actually doing. If you like the video so far, please leave us a like and a sub. A sub to the channel helps us make more videos for you to watch and keep the channel alive. You set the order book on the shelf above the refrigerator where it belongs, and you call your daughter for dinner, and the kitchen fills with the particular noise and warmth of an evening beginning, and somewhere in a house across town, a woman is looking at the vegetable brush on her sink and thinking that it is a very good brush, and you agree with her, and you always will. The training that Stanley and Fuller Brush and Avon and the other direct sales companies provided to their representatives in the 1950s was, by the standards of sales training generally, sophisticated. It was built around a theory of the sale that was genuinely psychological in its orientation, that understood the decision to purchase as the product of a specific emotional state rather than of rational product evaluation, and that trained its salesmen to create and maintain that emotional state through the demonstration and the conversation. The vocabulary used in the training was not the vocabulary of manipulation, or at least it was not presented as such, but the technique it described was the technique of making a woman feel capable and recognised and attended to, which was a technique that worked particularly well on women whose daily lives had provided them with limited quantities of those experiences. A woman who opened her door to a Stanley dealer in the post-war suburbs was often a woman who had moved recently to that suburb from somewhere else, who did not yet know many of her neighbours, whose husband was at work for most of the waking day, and whose children, if she had them, were not yet old enough to be meaningful conversational companions. The loneliness of suburban life in the post-war period is well documented in retrospect, and was poorly documented at the time, partly because loneliness was not a condition that the era's cultural narrative had any particular interest in acknowledging in the context of the domestic ideal it was selling. But the loneliness was real, and the door-to-door saleswoman who came to that door was, among other things, a visitor, a human connection, a woman who was going to spend 2 hours in your kitchen being interested in your house, and your problems and your opinions about cleaning products, and this was, for some women, a more valuable thing than anything in the sample case. The hostess party system understood this dynamic explicitly. The party was not simply a sales mechanism, though it was certainly that. It was also a social occasion with a specific and comfortable structure, where a group of women gathered in someone's home with a purpose and a host and a presenter and an agenda, which gave the gathering a shape that the more shapeless social occasions of suburban life sometimes lacked. Women who came to a Stanley party often came for the social occasion and stayed for the products, and the products they ordered were sometimes products they needed, and sometimes products that were simply the appropriate response to having had a pleasant afternoon in someone's living room with coffee and the company of other women. The company understood this. They were not selling cleaning products. They were selling an experience that happened to include cleaning products, which is a more accurate description of what was actually happening in those living rooms than any description that begins with the product. The women who built real businesses through the direct sales companies of the 1950s were doing something that the era's dominant narratives about women and work consistently undervalued and often misidentified. They were managing territories, conducting sales calls, designing and executing product demonstrations, scheduling and hosting events, tracking commissions and expenses, building customer relationships, and developing repeat business. These are the activities of a professional salesperson in any industry in any era, and the fact that the products being sold were for the domestic sphere did not change the nature of the professional activity. What it changed was the cultural recognition of that activity, which was systematically organised around the idea that a woman selling cleaning products to other women was participating in an extension of her domestic role rather than in a professional career, and that this was a distinction that mattered, that determined what she was owed and what she was called and how her work was understood by the world outside her own experience of it. Fuller Brush, which was the oldest and in many ways the most storied of the direct sales companies in this space, had started with male salesmen, the Fuller Brush man being a figure familiar enough in the American cultural landscape by the 1930s and 1940s to have generated jokes and radio programs and a film with Red Skelton in 1948. The company had begun shifting to female representatives in significant numbers during the Second World War, when the male workforce was unavailable for door-to-door work, and found that female representatives performed well in the domestic environment in which the products were sold, which should perhaps not have been a surprise given that the products were domestic products being sold to domestic consumers, but which nonetheless represented a discovery that the company took seriously and that shaped its recruiting strategy in the post-war period. By the 1950s, the Fuller Brush lady was a recognisable figure in her own right, with her own cultural presence, and the company that had started with men had become, in its most successful demographic, a company of women selling to women. The specific knowledge that these saleswomen carried was not only knowledge about their products, but knowledge about the domestic lives of their customers, knowledge developed through years of kitchen demonstrations and hostess parties, and the specific intimate access that the direct sales relationship provided to the interior life of a household. A Stanley dealer who had been working a territory for 5 years knew which houses had hard water and which had soft, which kitchens had older appliances that needed specific products, and which had the new automatic washers, which women were managing on tight budgets and would respond to the economy size, and which could be moved to the premium product without much persuasion. This was market intelligence of a granular and accurate kind, and the companies that organised and supported these sales networks were, through the accumulated knowledge of thousands of individual saleswomen, in possession of a picture of the American domestic market that their advertising departments could only approximate. The closing of a sale in the 1950s direct sales context was rarely a hard close, rarely the moment of pressure that the word close implies in some selling contexts. It was more commonly the natural completion of a conversation that had been moving in a specific direction since the door opened, a completion that felt, if the demonstration had gone well, less like persuasion and more like agreement, the acknowledgement between two people that they have arrived at the same understanding and that the next step follows naturally from the understanding. The order form was not an adversarial document, it was the paperwork of a shared conclusion, and the women who signed those order forms in the 1950s did so, in most cases, because they had been shown something that they genuinely wanted, and had decided that they genuinely wanted it, which is the most honest possible account of a consumer transaction, and the only account that generates the kind of loyalty that brings a customer back for a reorder 6 months later. The saleswoman who pulled her car out of the last street of her day and pointed it toward home in the fading October afternoon was not simply exhausted in the way that physical labour produces exhaustion. She was exhausted in the way that sustained human interaction produces exhaustion, the specific fatigue of having been present and attentive and engaging for 6 or 8 hours in a series of brief, intense, and consequential conversations, each of which required her to assess a new person quickly and accurately, and to find the specific connection between what she was carrying in her case and what that person needed, and to make that connection visible and compelling in the time available to her. This is the work of a person who is very good at people, and it is exhausting in the way that anything done at a high level for a full day is exhausting, which is to say genuinely and without any need for qualification or apology. She drove home in her car, which her commissions had been paying for, and she picked up her daughter, and she started dinner, and she added up her day, and the number at the bottom of the page was hers, not her husband's and not her employer's, because she had no employer in the conventional sense, and the number was what the day had been worth in the specific economic terms that the era provided for the work she did. It was not everything that her work was worth, but it was something, and something in the 1950s, for a woman who had organised her domestic life around her own income-generating capacity rather than waiting to be supported, was a considerable thing. The specific knowledge carried in the sample case, the knowledge of which brush for which surface, and which chemical for which problem, and which demonstration would connect most directly with which woman's domestic situation, was knowledge that had been developed over years, and that was genuinely useful in the world, and the women who carried it were genuinely skilled, and the transactions they facilitated were genuinely valuable in the lives of the women they sold to, and all of this is simply true regardless of how the era described it or failed to describe it. The era's failure to describe it accurately is the era's problem, which is the kind of problem that becomes visible in retrospect and is not visible from inside, because the people inside a cultural moment rarely have the perspective to see what the moment is systematically misrepresenting, particularly when the misrepresentation serves the interests of those who control the cultural narrative. The women in these stories, the woman on her knees with the toothbrush and the grout, and the woman with the 12-pound sample case, and the woman watching the drain cleaner foam in the kitchen of a woman she met 20 minutes ago, are all doing the same essential thing, which is the application of specific skill and specific knowledge to the specific physical problems of the domestic world. The era called this housekeeping when it was done unpaid, and a side business when it was done for money, and in both cases what it was actually was work, the kind that the world depended on, and the kind that the world preferred not to look at too directly, because looking at it directly would have required a conversation about value and compensation and recognition that the post-war consensus was not prepared to have. The bleach under the sink and the ammonia in the cabinet above it were not placed there with any particular awareness of their mutual incompatibility. They were placed there because they were the cleaning products that the advertisements recommended, the products that the grocery store carried in the largest quantities, the products that the neighbour and the sister-in-law and the women in the magazines used. The women who placed them there were not careless. They were uninformed, and the information that would have helped them was not in the advertising and not on the labels, and not in the household management guides of the era, because the industry that produced those products had no particular incentive to draw attention to the ways in which its products, used in combination, could cause harm, and the regulatory environment of the post-war period had not yet developed the tools or the mandate to require them to do so. This is not an indictment of those women or of those products in isolation. It is an observation about the gap between what the era claimed to know about its own domestic chemistry and what the era actually knew, and about who bore the consequences of that gap, which was, as in most such cases, not the companies that produced the products, but the women who used them in their kitchens and bathrooms without adequate information about what they were using. The phosphates that washed from American laundries into American waterways in the 1950s and 1960s did not make that journey without consequences. The chlorine vapours that accumulated in closed kitchens where bleach was applied without ventilation did not dissipate without effect. These are not hypothetical harms, they are documented ones, documented decades after the fact, by researchers who were looking at the long-term consequences of practices that the era had described as normal and safe and modern. Normal and safe and modern were three words that the post-war American domestic product industry used with considerable confidence. Normal because the products were ubiquitous, safe because they were sold and therefore sanctioned, modern because they were the products of industrial chemistry, and industrial chemistry was progress, and progress was inherently in the direction of better rather than worse, which was the defining faith of the post-war American moment, and which the consumer goods industry was happy to invoke on behalf of its products, regardless of whether the specific product in question warranted the invocation. The women who bought these products and used them in their houses were participating in a faith that the era held broadly and that the industry maintained carefully, and when the faith turned out to be incomplete, when the phosphate in the river and the chlorine in the lung revealed themselves, the recognition of what had been missed was also a recognition of how thoroughly the official story of the post-war domestic world had been organised around interests that were not those of the women living inside it. What remains, after all of this, is the work itself. The baking soda on the stovetop, the vinegar on the window glass, the paste wax on the hardwood floor, the hospital corner at the bottom of the bed, the order form filled and the sample case closed and the car pointed toward home. These things are real in a way that the advertising was not real, in a way that the official story of the gleaming post-war kitchen was not real, because they happened and they were done by specific people with specific hands on specific Monday mornings, and the houses they produced were real houses in which real people lived real lives. The work was not always seen, and not always named, and not always compensated in proportion to its value, but it was done, and done with skill, and the women who did it knew the difference between a floor that had been properly waxed and a floor that had not, between grout that had been attended to and grout that had not, between a laundry that had come out bright and a laundry that had come out grey, and that knowledge, specific and practical and accumulated through years of Monday mornings, was real knowledge, and the women who held it were real experts, and the houses they maintained were genuinely the better for their attention. There is a photograph, or rather there are thousands of photographs, that represent a particular vision of the American home in the post-war decades, and they share a consistent visual grammar that is worth examining closely, because what they include and what they exclude tells a story that the photographs themselves were not designed to tell. In the included column, a kitchen that is immaculate, its surfaces gleaming, its appliances white and modern, its counter holding at most a toaster and a bowl of decorative fruit, everything in its place and the place chosen for maximum visual clarity. A woman who is cleaning or has just cleaned, her dress unwrinkled, her hair set, her expression one of calm satisfaction, as if the cleaning were a pleasant interlude rather than the dominant physical experience of her working day. Products arranged on counters with labels facing outward. The products new, the products effective, the products responsible for the gleaming surfaces around her. In the excluded column, the chemical smell of those products, which is significant and which, in a kitchen in the 1950s with the windows closed on a cold day, is not pleasant in the way that pleasant is usually meant. The hands of the woman, which are not the hands in the photograph, which are the hands of someone who has been washing and scrubbing and wringing for hours, hands that are dry and sometimes cracked along the knuckles, hands that have been in hot water and cold water and chemical solutions repeatedly, and that show the evidence of that exposure in ways that no cold cream fully addresses. What the windows of that kitchen look like from outside at 6 a.m, before the cleaning starts, when the grease of the previous night's cooking has settled on every surface in the kitchen in a thin, invisible film that the photograph will never show. The photograph shows the cleaning done. It does not show the cleaning. This gap between the image of the clean American home and the reality of maintaining that home was not accidental. It was structural. The advertising of cleaning products in the post-war period was built on a foundation that required the work of cleaning to be invisible, because if the work were visible, the products would have to be sold as labour-saving devices, and labour-saving devices carried within them the implication that the labour was significant, and the implication that the labour was significant raised a set of questions about who was doing the labour and whether that was the appropriate arrangement that the post-war cultural consensus was not prepared to examine. So the advertising sold a different story, the story that cleaning was easy, quick, almost incidental, a matter of applying the right product and allowing the chemistry to do what chemistry does, and that the gleaming kitchen was not the result of hours of physical work but of the correct household product intelligently applied, which any modern woman would naturally want to have on hand. The products themselves were not deceptions. Tide cleaned laundry more effectively than soap. Ajax removed soap scum from porcelain more efficiently than baking soda. Lysol disinfected surfaces with a thoroughness that a vinegar solution could not match. These were real products that did real things, and the women who used them got real results from them. The deception, if that is the right word for it, was in the framing. The suggestion that these results were easily obtained and that obtaining them was a natural, almost automatic expression of the domestic role, rather than the exhausting and relentless physical labour that it actually was. What the advertisements also did not say, in the 1940s and 1950s and well into the 1960s, was anything meaningful about the chemistry of the products themselves in terms of what that chemistry was doing to the women using them. The era's relationship with household chemicals was one of almost complete uncritical confidence, a faith in the products of modern industry that was part of the broader post-war faith in science and progress, and the capacity of American manufacturing to produce solutions to every domestic problem. The chemists who worked for Procter & Gamble and Colgate-Palmolive and Lever Brothers were credentialed professionals. The products they made were tested. If they worked, they were good. The idea that a product could work effectively at its stated purpose and also be causing harm through a different mechanism was not part of the cultural conversation about household products in that era, with anything approaching the seriousness the question deserved. The phosphate issue with detergents like Tide would not come to public attention until the late 1960s and early 1970s, when algal blooms in rivers and lakes began to be linked to the phosphate runoff from laundry effluent. which was entering waterways through sewage treatment plants that were not designed to remove phosphates. The environmental conversation that followed was genuine and important, and eventually resulted in regulatory changes and reformulation across the industry. But this is getting somewhat ahead of the story in the kitchen, where the more immediate concerns were not environmental, but personal. Chlorine bleach, which was a standard component of the post-war cleaning arsenal and which appeared in product form under the Clorox label, among others, had been in household use since well before the 1950s, but the post-war period saw its use intensify, partly because the new synthetic detergents were more compatible with bleach than the old soap powders had been, and partly because the era's particular anxiety about germs and contamination made the disinfecting properties of bleach feel essential rather than optional. Women were adding bleach to their laundry and using it on kitchen and bathroom surfaces with a frequency and in concentrations that would be considered inadvisable today, and they were doing this in enclosed spaces because post-war tract housing was designed for thermal efficiency rather than ventilation, and the windows that might have dissipated the chlorine fumes were often closed. The acute symptoms of chlorine exposure, the eye and throat irritation, the coughing, the headaches, the specific uncomfortable tightness in the chest that comes from breathing chlorine gas even in the low concentrations produced by household bleach use, were understood as the minor unpleasantness of a powerful cleaning product rather than as physiological warnings. Women who experienced these symptoms while cleaning with bleach attributed them to the strength of the product, which was taken as evidence of its efficacy. The product worked because it was strong. The strength was slightly uncomfortable. The discomfort was the price of the clean. This was the logic, and it was not entirely illogical in a world that did not have easy access to information about the cumulative effects of chronic low-level chemical exposure. Ammonia-based cleaners were another standard component of the era's cleaning toolkit, and ammonia shared with bleach a fundamental incompatibility that was not communicated on the labels of either product, and that was not general knowledge among the women using them. Mixing bleach and ammonia produces chloramine vapors, which are significantly more toxic than either bleach or ammonia used separately, and the symptoms of chloramine exposure, coughing, shortness of breath, chest pain, in severe cases pulmonary edema, are severe enough to require medical attention. Women who mixed bleach and ammonia while cleaning, which was not an uncommon occurrence in a kitchen where both products were in use and the labels were not explicit about their mutual incompatibility, were exposing themselves to a genuine chemical hazard that the advertising and marketing of both products had done nothing to warn them about. The label of a bottle of ammonia-based window cleaner in the 1950s mentioned the product's effective cleaning action and its suitability for glass and chrome. It did not mention bleach. Lye, which is sodium hydroxide, had been a cleaning agent in American homes since before there was an American household product industry to speak of, and it continued to be available in the post-war period in commercial drain cleaners, most notably Drano, which launched in 1923 and remained a standard fixture under American sinks through the mid-century decades. Lye is extremely caustic. It will dissolve the organic matter blocking a drain, which is what it is supposed to do, and it will also dissolve the organic matter in your eyes and on your skin if you're exposed to it, which is a fact that the product's packaging communicated with rather less urgency than it probably should have. The instructions on a container of drain cleaner in the 1950s typically said something like handle with care and keep out of reach of children, which is true as far as it goes, but which does not fully convey the speed with which an alkali burn from lye will cause serious tissue damage or the importance of keeping it entirely away from the face. The women who used these products were not reckless. They were operating with the information available to them in their cultural and physical environment, which was an environment that had organized itself around the proposition that the products on the grocery store shelf were safe for household use, tested by the companies that made them, approved by the regulatory structures of the era, and recommended by the magazines and radio programs and eventually television advertisements that were the primary information sources for domestic product selection. The cultural trust in packaged goods was not irrational. In an environment where the alternative was products that were genuinely more hazardous, lye soap made from wood ash and animal fat, cleaning preparations made from turpentine and solvents with no safety testing at all, and the post-war grocery store product was, in the aggregate, safer than many of the things it had replaced. But safer than what came before is not the same as safe, and the products of the post-war cleaning arsenal occupied a middle ground that the advertising never represented honestly, because honest representation of that middle ground would have required the acknowledgement of risk, and risk was not part of the message. The hands of the post-war American housewife were, in many cases, in poor condition. This is not a minor observation. The combination of frequent hot water exposure, repeated contact with soap and detergent and bleach and ammonia and commercial cleaners, and the general climate of many parts of the country produced a chronic dermatitis in many women that was accepted as simply an occupational condition of housekeeping, rather than as a medical issue requiring attention. Rough, red, cracked and sometimes broken skin on the hands and forearms was common enough in that population that it was built into the iconography of the era. The Playtex living glove advertisements of the 1950s, which showed a smiling woman pulling on her rubber gloves before tackling the dishes, were selling protection from a real hazard. And the fact that the advertisements framed this protection in terms of beauty and softness, rather than in terms of chemical safety, reflected the era's priorities rather than the product's actual function. The rubber glove was one of the cases where the era's domestic product industry actually did address a real hazard, even if it did so in the language of beauty rather than safety. Women who wore rubber gloves while working with hot water and chemical cleaners genuinely protected their skin in a way that those who worked without gloves did not. And the glove companies knew this, and the magazines that carried their advertisements knew this, and the women who bought the gloves knew this. And the language of beauty was simply a more acceptable framing in a cultural context that was not yet ready to describe housework as hazardous, and the woman performing it as a person entitled to occupational health protection. If you like the video so far, please leave us a like and a sub. A sub to the channel helps us make more videos for you to watch and keep the channel alive. The gloves worked. The language around them was a concession to an era that had decided how to think about women's domestic labour, and was not going to change that thinking without a great deal of argument. The ventilation question, which should have been part of any conversation about household chemical use in enclosed spaces, was essentially absent from the domestic product discourse of the post-war period. The advice to open a window while cleaning, which appears occasionally in household management guides of the era, was framed as a comfort measure rather than a safety precaution, a way to keep the kitchen pleasant rather than a way to keep the woman cleaning it from accumulating chronic respiratory exposure. The connection between poor ventilation during chemical cleaning and the development of asthma and other respiratory conditions would not be seriously investigated in the context of household cleaning exposure for decades, and by the time researchers began to document the association between occupational household cleaning chemical exposure and respiratory health outcomes in the 1980s and 1990s, the generation of women who had cleaned American kitchens in the post-war period had already absorbed what they had absorbed, and the conversation was about future generations rather than past ones. The post-war clean home ideal was not simply an advertising construct. It was a real cultural value that many women held genuinely and pursued with real commitment and real skill and real effort. The women who kept the houses of the mid-century American domestic world maintained those houses with a competence and an attention that is worth acknowledging on its own terms, not through the distorting lens of either the advertising that idealized it or the later cultural critique that sometimes condescended to it. They knew their houses in the way that you know a thing you have worked with carefully for years. They knew which surfaces needed what treatment and in what order and at what frequency, and the knowledge they carried was real knowledge, practical and accumulated and transmissible, which is why it was transmitted from mothers to daughters across generations in the form of the specific tricks and formulas and sequences that this conversation is named for. But they also worked without adequate information about what their tools were doing to them, and they worked without adequate recognition of the complexity and physical demand of what they were doing, and they worked inside a cultural frame that was designed to make the work look easy and natural and automatic rather than demanding and skilled and ongoing, and that frame served a great many interests: the product companies and the appliance manufacturers and the advertisers and the magazines and the cultural consensus about what women were for, and it served almost no interest that belonged to the women themselves. The acknowledgement of that is not a diminishment of the work or of the women who did it. It is an insistence on seeing them clearly in the actual conditions of their actual lives, with the full complexity of what those conditions required of them, which is the very least that any person doing serious work deserves. The gleaming kitchen of the post-war advertisements is a real place, and a fabricated one at the same time. The real place is the kitchen that was cleaned and maintained and cared for by a real woman with real hands and a real schedule and a real understanding of what clean meant and how to get there from wherever the kitchen was on a given Monday morning. The fabricated one is the kitchen with no smell, no stiffening fingers, no grease at the back of the range that has been there since Tuesday, no woman who is tired, just the gleaming surfaces and the smiling woman and the product on the counter with the label facing out. The real place is worth honouring. The fabricated one is worth examining. They are not the same place, and understanding the difference between them is a way of understanding something true and important about the era that produced both, and about the women who lived in one while the other was sold to them as their own reflection. The specific tricks and formulas that the women of this era passed down through their kitchens and their daughters and their neighbours, the baking soda on the stovetop and the vinegar on the windows and the borax in the toilet bowl and the paste wax on the hardwood floors, are in many cases still effective, still economical, still the best tools for the specific tasks they were always the best tools for. They are also, and this is worth sitting with for a moment, the evidence of something that the cleaning product industry never fully acknowledged, that the women using them were not passive recipients of industrial chemistry, but were themselves experimenters and improvisers and transmitters of accumulated domestic knowledge, that they had developed and refined a body of practical chemistry over generations of household work, and that this body of knowledge was no less valid for having been developed in a kitchen rather than in a laboratory, and no less worth preserving for having been carried by women who are never described as scientists or technicians or skilled workers, but simply as housewives, which was a word that contained everything and acknowledged almost nothing. So when tonight's conversation comes to rest, and the light that comes through the kitchen window is the particular low-late light of a day that is already mostly behind you, and there is a clean kitchen somewhere in the world that was made clean today by someone who knows how to use what she has, there is a real truth in that. Not the advertising truth, not the gleaming surface label facing out truth, but the actual human truth of competence and effort and the specific satisfaction of a thing done correctly with attention. That truth belongs to the women who developed it, and the women who carried it forward, and the women who are carrying it still, in whatever form the work takes in their particular house in their particular year, with whatever products and tools their particular moment has given them to work with. The house has been cleaned, the floors are done, the clean sheets are on the bed, the coffee cup is washed. Somewhere in the country, in every time zone, on every street, a woman who worked hard today is finally sitting down, and the work that she did today is real, and the skills she used to do it are real, and the house around her is cleaner than it was before she started. And that is the oldest story in the domestic world and the most persistently unfinished one. There is something that connects tonight's 4 journeys through this world, something that sits underneath the baking soda and the Tide box and the 12-pound sample case and the chemical smell of the gleaming post-war kitchen, and it is this, that the domestic world of mid-century America was maintained daily and weekly and across the decades by the application of genuine skill and genuine effort to the specific physical problem of making a house into something that felt like home, and that this application of skill and effort was performed largely by women who were given very little language for what they were doing, who were asked to understand it as natural rather than demanding, automatic rather than learned, expression rather than labour, and who continued to do it beautifully and effectively anyway, because the alternative was a house that was not what they wanted it to be, and because the work was, in the end, the work that connected them most directly to the life they were trying to maintain. The baking soda and the vinegar and the paste wax and the borax and the door-to-door saleswoman and the orange detergent box are all parts of the same story, the story of a generation of women who are managing the physical world of their households with intelligence and improvisation, and occasionally with products that were doing things to them that no one had bothered to warn them about, and who were doing this inside an advertising-driven cultural narrative that was very confident it understood what their lives were like, and very determined to keep that narrative clean and gleaming, and without the grease at the back of the range that is always there when you look closely. Tonight, wherever you are and whatever time it is, the women of those post-war kitchens are worth thinking about with the kind of specific attention that they rarely received. Not as icons and not as victims, but as people. People with specific skills and specific fatigue and specific satisfaction in the work of a completed day. People who found something worth doing in the maintenance of a home, even when the world around them was doing its best to tell them that maintenance was not the same as accomplishment, that housekeeping was not the same as work, that the gleaming kitchen was simply the natural condition of a home, rather than the result of a woman who started before sunrise and sat down, finally at 4 in the afternoon with a cup of tea and a house around her that was genuinely thoroughly clean. She earned that cup of tea. She knew she did. And if the world of her era did not say so plainly enough, then we can say it now, tonight, from whatever quiet room you are drifting through on your way to sleep, in a house that carries, in some way, the long legacy of all that careful, unacknowledged work. Sleep well. Where in the world are you watching from? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. See you on the next one.